Imagine you're sitting in a quiet room, no distractions, just your thoughts. You look at the chair you're sitting on, you feel its texture, you tell yourself it's real. But then a thought slips in. How do you know the chair exists? You see it, touch it, feel the weight of your body on it. But what if all of that happens in your mind? What if your mind created the chair, the room, the silence? That's where solipsism starts. Solipsism is the idea that only your own mind is certain to exist. Everything else, the people you meet, the things you touch, the world outside, could be part of a mental projection. Maybe you're dreaming. We'd love to hear from you. Share in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is. It's amazing to see how we're all connected through these videos. If you enjoy these insightful explorations, consider subscribing so we can continue bringing you more thought-provoking content. Maybe you're stuck in a simulation. Maybe nothing outside your thoughts ever was. It doesn't say the world definitely isn't real. It says you can't be sure. Think about when you dream. While dreaming, everything feels real. You feel scared in nightmares, happy in fantasies. You see people you know, places you've been, places you've never seen, and yet none of it is there. No matter how real the dream feels, you always wake up in bed. What if this life works the same way, but you never wake up? What if there's no waking up? A man might walk into a coffee shop, order a drink, and chat with the barista. He hears the sound of steaming milk. He smells roasted beans. He tastes the drink. From his view, he lives in a shared world full of people and events. But solipsism asks, can he prove any of that is real? Can he be sure the barista exists? He hears her voice and sees her face. But those are sensations, sight and sound, that happen in his mind. The idea is not that the barista isn't real. The idea is that he can't prove she is, not in any final way. The core of solipsism comes down to a gap between experience and reality. Everything you know comes through your senses: sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell. If your senses deceive you, then your world shifts. You've seen illusions. A straight stick looks bent in water. The sun looks like it moves across the sky, but the earth spins. Your senses give you one version of the world, and sometimes that version is wrong. Now imagine your senses always lie. Not in small ways like optical illusions, but in totality. Imagine you walk through a city, but the buildings, the people, the conversations, everything is a construction of your own mind. You don't see the world, you create it. And if that's true, then you are alone, completely, forever. That's the unsettling part of solipsism. If you take it seriously, it leads to deep isolation. Because if nobody else is real, there's nobody else to talk to. No one else to love or hate. You can't ask questions and get real answers. You're the actor, the audience, and the stage. You're every voice in every room. It all comes from you, or more exactly, from your mind. Not you as the person with a name and a history, but the mind behind it. The observer, the thinker, the one who asks questions like this in the first place. There are many versions of this idea across history. Philosophers have written about it for centuries. Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am." He meant that while you can doubt everything else, your body, the outside world, even your memories, you can't doubt the fact that you're doubting. The act of thinking proves that something exists to do the thinking. But what that something is, whether it has a body, whether it lives in a world, that remains unclear. In modern terms, think of a computer simulation. You sit at a desk and play a video game. The game world looks real. Characters have voices. Trees sway. Roads stretch for miles. But you know it's not real. It's code. A long string of instructions that create the illusion of space, time, and motion. Now flip it. What if you are in the game? You see grass and sky and people. You feel the wind. But what if none of that exists outside your perception? If you take away the code or the mind that runs it, everything vanishes. Nothing stands on its own. Now some people say, if solipsism were true, wouldn't things be perfect? Wouldn't I shape the world how I want? That assumes you control your mind fully. But even inside yourself, much happens without your input. You don't choose your dreams. You don't pick your thoughts. Sometimes your mind serves up memories or fears or images without asking. If your mind creates the world, it may do so the same way, without conscious control. You don't dream a peaceful meadow. You dream a maze full of threats. Why wouldn't your waking life follow the same pattern? Let's say you're talking to a friend. You laugh together. You feel close. Solipsism would say your friend may not be real. Her laughter may be a sound your mind invented, but the feeling of connection still happens. It's real to you, and maybe that's enough. Maybe the experience matters more than whether someone else exists, or maybe that's just something your mind tells itself to stay sane. Think about memory. You remember your childhood. You remember people, places, smells, tastes, but memory is unreliable. Studies show people misremember events all the time. We invent details. We erase others. If your past can be mistaken, then how do you know it happened at all? Maybe your mind wrote the whole backstory just moments ago. Maybe it wrote this paragraph a moment ago. If time exists only in your thoughts, then nothing stops the story from changing. You could go outside, walk through a park and hear birdsong. You could watch clouds move. You could feel the sun on your face. All of it may be real, but none of it is certain. And that's the center of solipsism, not denial, but doubt. A kind of radical, endless doubt. Not, I believe no one exists, but I can't prove anyone does. That's why it's not a belief in the usual sense. It's more like a lens you can put on and take off. A filter that sharpens one fact. The only thing you truly know is that you are aware. Solipsism doesn't offer answers. It offers a question that never stops. It strips away assumptions. You assume the world is real. You assume other people have minds like yours. You assume time moves forward. But solipsism says, let's remove those assumptions. What's left? Only thought. Only the flicker of awareness that notices itself. It doesn't mean you stop living. You still go to work, call your friends, take care of your body. You still cry when someone dies. You still feel joy in music. But deep in the back of your mind, the question stays. Is this real? Is anyone there, or are you whispering into your own dream? That's the space solipsism creates. Not an answer, not a system, just a haunting kind of silence. A quiet room, a thinking mind, and the sound of your own breath. You're watching the news. A story breaks about a government stoning a woman for adultery. You feel shock. You feel anger. You say to yourself, that's wrong. But someone else says that's their culture. And then another voice says, who are you to judge? That's where moral relativism begins. Moral relativism is the idea that right and wrong depend on context. What one group sees as good, another might see as evil. What's normal in one society may be unthinkable in another. The core claim is that no single set of morals stands above the rest. Morals come from people, not from nature or a god. And if people build them, they can be different anywhere. It sounds open-minded at first. If people grow up with different beliefs, maybe it's fair to let them live by those beliefs. Maybe there's no single rule book, but that idea runs into trouble fast. Some rules are easy to accept. Don't kill for fun, don't steal what isn't yours, don't torture children. But in practice, many groups have done all of those things and called it justice. That's where moral relativism stops being harmless. Because if every culture decides what's right, then nothing can be called wrong. Not truly. A tribe may sacrifice its own children to please spirits. A cult may silence its members through fear. A dictatorship may jail people for speaking. These things happen, and the people who do them often believe they're doing the right thing. So the question becomes, does belief make it right? Imagine two people, both honest in their views. One says that women should have equal rights. The other says women belong to men. They both feel certain. They both grew up in systems that reinforce those ideas. Moral relativism would say both views come from different moral systems, each valid in its own context. But that leads to a problem. If both are valid, then on what basis can we say one is better? You might say, just don't interfere, let people live how they want. But that ignores the people within those systems who don't agree. Not everyone in a repressive society agrees with the rules. Some people suffer quietly, others fight and risk their lives. If right and wrong are just local customs, then there's no ground to support the rebels. There's no way to say, you deserve better. All you can say is, that's not how we do things here. In some societies, honor killings still happen. A father kills his daughter because she talked to a boy. He believes he did the right thing. His neighbors nod in approval. His faith tells him he acted with courage. Under moral relativism, their moral system explains and defends his actions. But if we accept that, we lose the power to say the act was wrong in any absolute way. We can say it feels wrong to us, but so what? That's just our feeling. Moral relativism often comes from a good place. People want to avoid arrogance. They don't want to act like their way is the only way. That makes sense, but there's a difference between humility and silence. You can admit you don't know everything without giving up your right to object. Just because someone believes something doesn't mean it deserves respect. Some beliefs harm people. Some values destroy lives. Culture explains why people do things. It doesn't excuse them. Now think about history. Slavery was once legal in much of the world. Whole economies ran on it. Families taught their children it was normal. Moral relativism would say that those societies had their own codes. They believed they were right. But from today's view, we don't just say they were different. We say they were wrong, deeply. Not because we changed, because their actions caused real harm, and that harm matters. A world built only on moral relativism offers no clear way to stop abuse. If someone says it's right in our culture, that ends the debate. There's no court to appeal to, no universal standard. Everything folds into context. And if the context supports oppression, then the oppressed stay trapped. Now flip it. Think of people who stand up against their own culture. A woman in a strict religious society refuses to wear a veil. A gay man in a conservative town comes out. A teacher in a closed country speaks the truth. These people often go against the grain. They reject the moral code around them. And why do they do it? Because they believe in something deeper. Something not tied to place or group. Maybe it's fairness. Maybe it's dignity. Maybe it's freedom. But whatever it is, it points to a truth bigger than custom. If moral relativism were fully right, then those people would be wrong to rebel. But we often admire them. We call them brave. That tells us something. You can look at moral relativism as a mirror. It shows you that your values are not natural facts. They came from somewhere. They were taught. That's useful. It gives you perspective. But you can't stop there. Once you understand where values come from, you have to ask what they do. Who do they help? Who do they hurt? Take a small example. In one country, people greet with handshakes. In another, they bow. That's harmless moral difference. But now take a bigger example. One group says girls should go to school. Another says they should stay home and marry young. That's not just custom. That shapes lives, that limits futures. And if you say both views are valid, you take away the voice of the girl who wants more. Moral relativism removes the right to say no. No to cruelty, no to fear, no to silence. And yet, without some form of it, we risk forcing our ways on others. The challenge is to find a balance. You need to listen. You need to understand, but you also need to judge. Not with arrogance, but with care, with reason, with a clear eye on what helps and what harms. Sometimes people use moral relativism to protect themselves from hard conversations. They don't want to speak up, so they say, "It's not my place." But silence is not neutral. Injustice grows in silence. If you see something wrong and say nothing, that gives it room. You don't have to shout, but you do have to see. A child beaten for discipline, a woman jailed for driving, a man killed for his beliefs. These things happen today, right now. And if moral relativism means we shrug and say that's their culture, then we've lost something basic. Not the right to rule over others, not the power to change the world, just the simple ability to say that shouldn't happen to anyone. Belief shapes action, but belief alone doesn't make something right. To know what's right, you have to look at what things do. Who wins? Who suffers? What kind of life grows from the rule? When you ask those questions, you move past custom. You move towards something that may not be universal, but comes close enough to fight for. You walk into a store, you see something expensive. You look around, no one's watching. You reach out, grab it, and slip it into your pocket. Later, the police catch you. They ask, "Why did you do it?" You say, "I don't know, I just did." Now imagine someone tells you that you had no choice, that the moment your hand moved was already set, like a train on tracks. That's the idea behind determinism. Determinism is the view that every event, including human actions, comes from prior causes. Nothing happens by chance. Nothing happens outside of cause and effect. In this view, your thoughts, choices, and behaviors all come from something before them. Your biology, your upbringing, your environment, your memories, even the timing of neurons firing in your brain. They all push you forward, step by step, like a machine following a program. Most people believe in free will. They believe they choose what to do. that they could have done otherwise. You choose what to eat. You choose who to love. You choose whether to lie or tell the truth. But determinism says those choices might be illusions. You feel like you choose, but what if that feeling is just another result of your brain doing what it must? Think about flipping a coin. It looks random. But if you knew the force of your thumb, the angle, the air pressure, and every tiny variable, you could predict the outcome every time. It only looks like chance because you don't see all the pieces. Determinism says people work the same way. You think you choose to speak, move, or stop, but under the surface, your brain follows rules, chemical and physical laws, like clockwork. Now imagine a man commits murder. He pulls the trigger. Someone dies. The court asks, why did he do it? They look for motive, mental state, past behavior. They ask if he knew it was wrong. But what if every step of his action came from prior causes? Childhood abuse, brain injury, social isolation, a slow buildup of anger, a trigger event, and then the act. If all of that was determined, if nothing could have gone differently, how can we blame him? Legal systems rest on the idea of responsibility. If you break the law by choice, you're guilty. If you were forced or not in your right mind, we treat you differently. But what if all action, even choice, comes from forces beyond your control? Then guilt becomes a strange word. Punishment becomes hard to defend, not because the harm wasn't real, but because the actor couldn't have done otherwise. Imagine a boy grows up in a violent home. He learns that strength means control. That fear keeps people in line. He joins a gang. Years later, he robs someone. Under free will, he chose that path. Under determinism, that path chose him. Each step followed from the last. If you rewound time and played it forward again, he would rob that person every time. There's no fork in the road, only one road. Some people say determinism removes meaning, that if everything is set, then nothing matters. But that's not the real issue. The deeper problem is that our ideas of praise and blame break down. We thank someone for being kind. We punish someone for being cruel. But if neither could help what they did, those reactions start to look strange. You don't praise a clock for telling time. You don't punish a storm for wrecking a house. So why treat people differently? Still, we have to live in a world with laws and consequences. So even if determinism is true, we need a system to protect people. We might lock someone up not to punish, but to prevent harm. Like putting a wild animal in a cage, not out of hate, but out of necessity. But that shifts the tone. Instead of asking, is he guilty? We ask, is he dangerous? We focus less on moral blame and more on public safety. Think of addiction. A woman steals to buy drugs. Some say she's a criminal. Others say she's sick. If she had no choice, if her brain was wired to crave and her life gave her no way out, then calling her guilty seems misplaced. We can still stop her from harming others. We can still try to help her, but the idea that she deserves punishment fades. You might think this only applies to rare cases, murder, addiction, extreme trauma. But determinism applies to everything. Small things too. The tone you use with your friend, the urge to check your phone, the decision to walk away from a fight. If you look closely, none of it floats free. It all connects, a long chain of causes leading to the moment, and behind each cause is another. Science often backs this up. Brain scans show activity before people become aware of decisions. A scientist can sometimes predict your choice before you feel you've made it. The brain starts the process. The mind catches up. That doesn't mean you're a robot, but it does mean your sense of control might come after the fact, not before. This raises a question. If free will is an illusion, can we build a fair society? Can we hold people accountable without blaming them? Can we praise people for good deeds while knowing they were shaped to do them? It's not easy. We would have to rethink justice, education, even how we raise children. Not as a matter of willpower, but as a matter of shaping causes, creating the right conditions, reducing harm before it starts. Take a man who donates to charity. We might call him generous, but what if his parents raised him that way? What if his brain makes him feel good when he helps? What if his wealth came from luck, not effort? Does he deserve praise? Maybe, maybe not. But if determinism is true, his act came from somewhere, and so did the good it caused. Maybe that's enough. Some people reject determinism because it feels cold. It takes away the soul, the spark, the idea of human freedom. But it also forces us to look deeper, to see that people act for reasons. And if we understand those reasons, we can help more and judge less. Free will gives comfort. It says you own your choices. You deserve your life. But determinism tells a different story. One where your life is a stream, not a ladder, where your steps follow the flow. Where justice means not just judging people, but understanding what made them who they are. A man puts on his uniform. He eats breakfast, kisses his wife goodbye, and goes to work. His job is not glamorous. He sits at a desk, processes papers, and signs orders. He does what he's told. He doesn't raise his voice. He follows protocol. Later, it turns out that his job helped send thousands of people to their deaths. He didn't pull a trigger. He didn't give the final command. But the system worked because of him. That's the picture Hannah Arendt gave when she wrote about the banality of evil. The idea came from her report on the trial of Adolf Eichmann, a Nazi officer involved in organizing the transport of Jews to death camps. He wasn't a monster in the way people expected. He didn't seem cruel or fanatical. He didn't foam at the mouth or shout hateful speeches. He spoke politely. He used formal language. He insisted he never hated Jews. He said he was just following orders. Arendt didn't say he was innocent. Far from it. What disturbed her was how ordinary he seemed. He wasn't stupid. He wasn't brilliant. He was average. That was the point. Evil doesn't always show up with rage or madness. Sometimes it comes in the form of obedience. A man who does what he's told. A woman who doesn't ask questions. A worker who files the right forms. They all stay in their roles, and the system keeps going. Most people think of evil as extreme. Massacres, torture, hatred. They imagine villains who look and act different from the rest of us. But Arendt's idea flips that around. She showed how horror can grow out of routine. A person doesn't need to feel hatred to do harm. They just need to stop thinking, to stop asking whether what they're doing is right. Imagine a company runs a factory that dumps chemicals into a river. The workers know the waste is dangerous, but they clock in, follow steps, and do what their boss says. They tell themselves it's not their decision, that someone higher up is responsible. Years later, people in nearby towns get sick. Children are born with problems. The damage spreads, but the workers feel no guilt. They did their jobs. They didn't break any rules. That's how banality works. The harm doesn't come from fire or fury. It comes from passivity, from people doing nothing but their small task. Now think about a guard at a detention center. He doesn't decide who gets locked up. He doesn't write the laws. He walks the halls. He checks the doors. He delivers food. Some days he sees cruelty. Other guards shout or shove. Detainees beg for help. He feels uncomfortable, but he tells himself it's not his place. He doesn't enjoy the pain, but he doesn't stop it either. His silence becomes part of the machine. What makes this kind of evil so disturbing is that it wears a normal face. It doesn't call attention to itself. It doesn't make a scene. It blends in. It uses language like procedure and policy. It hides behind phrases like, "I'm just doing my job," or "that's above my pay grade." People like Eichmann use those lines, and history shows they're not rare. In bureaucracies, responsibility spreads so thin that no one feels it. One person writes the rules, another carries them out, a third watches from a distance. Each step seems clean, no blood, no direct harm. But put together, they produce real suffering. That's how systems shield the people inside. That's how evil keeps moving. People often think they'd act differently. They imagine they'd speak up, refuse to take part. But tests like the Milgram experiment challenge that belief. In that study, subjects were told to administer electric shocks to someone in another room. The person in charge wore a lab coat and used calm, firm language. Most subjects kept going, even when the other person screamed, even when it sounded like he was in pain. The shocks weren't real, but the subjects thought they were, and they kept pressing the button. Why? Because an authority told them to. It wasn't rage that made them do it. It was obedience, a desire to follow rules, to avoid conflict, to keep things simple. That's what Arendt meant. Evil doesn't always explode. Sometimes it just flows along, step by step, with no one taking full responsibility. You can see this in war. A pilot drops a bomb on a village. He doesn't see the people. He sees a target on a screen. He follows coordinates. The mission is approved. He hears the words collateral damage. Afterward, he doesn't feel like a killer. He followed orders. The system worked as designed. Or look at a workplace that pushes toxic culture. Employees are overworked, some are bullied, others burn out. The managers set the tone. HR turns a blind eye. Coworkers stay quiet. No one stands up. Not because they're cruel, because they don't want to risk their jobs. They tell themselves it's not their problem. Bit by bit, harm becomes normal. The banality of evil doesn't mean people are innocent. It means they can do great harm without evil intent. They stop thinking critically. They surrender judgment to systems and roles. They avoid moral questions. They focus on tasks, and in doing so, they let harm happen. Eichmann said he was just a transport officer. He didn't kill anyone himself. He moved papers, scheduled trains. He said he had no personal hatred. He even claimed he followed the law. Arendt didn't buy it, but she also didn't paint him as a monster. That would have been easier. She saw a man who had stopped thinking for himself, who replaced judgment with cliches, who traded moral choice for obedience. That's what made him dangerous. You don't have to wear a uniform to take part in this kind of system. Any role can fall into it. Teachers, clerks, officers, voters. When people stop asking, is this right? And only ask, is this allowed or is this required? They become part of something larger. Sometimes that something becomes a machine of cruelty. Arendt didn't say evil is boring. She said it becomes ordinary when people treat it like routine, when they stop seeing victims as people, when they let rules replace conscience. That's when evil slips in through small decisions made every day by people who think they're doing nothing wrong. The danger isn't just in bad people doing bad things. It's in regular people going along, doing their jobs, keeping quiet, telling themselves it's not their role to judge. That's what makes evil banal, not its size, but its face. A neighbor, a clerk, a man in a gray suit pushing papers. Evil doesn't need fire and brimstone. Sometimes it just needs silence. You believe you're a good person. You try to be honest, fair, and kind. One day, you lie to someone who trusts you. It's not a small lie. It causes real harm. You feel tension. You can't ignore it. Your actions don't match your self-image. That discomfort is cognitive dissonance. It's not just guilt. It's a mental strain that comes from holding two conflicting ideas at the same time. You see yourself as good, but you acted in a way that doesn't fit. The mind doesn't like that. It wants harmony, so it works to resolve the tension, often by reshaping what you believe. Cognitive dissonance doesn't shout. It works quietly. It pushes you to explain away your actions, to shift blame, or to change how you see the world. It doesn't always aim for truth. It aims for comfort. You might tell yourself the lie didn't matter, that the other person would have been hurt no matter what, that you had no choice. These aren't facts, they're shields. They help protect your sense of self. This process isn't rare. It happens all the time, in small ways. A smoker knows smoking causes cancer, but he still smokes. He might say, it helps me relax, or my grandfather smoked and lived to 90. He doesn't stop because facts alone don't drive change. The conflict between knowledge and behavior creates discomfort, and the easiest way to reduce it is not to quit. It's to shift the belief. Not smoking is deadly, but the danger is overblown. That belief brings relief. It restores peace. People don't like to think of themselves as wrong. So when new information threatens their beliefs, they often resist it. Not because the facts are unclear, but because accepting them would mean changing how they see themselves. Imagine someone who sees themselves as rational and open-minded. They read a study that shows their political stance is based on false assumptions. That person has a choice: accept the data and feel the sting of being wrong, or dismiss the study as biased. Many choose the second option, not because it's true, but because it's easier. Cognitive dissonance often shows up in relationships. A person stays with a partner who mistreats them. They say, he's not that bad, or she just gets stressed. Deep down, they know something's wrong. But they've invested time, love, and hope. Walking away would mean admitting they stayed too long, that they ignored the signs. That hurts. So the mind finds another way. It changes the story. It softens the truth to protect the ego. You can see it in consumer choices too. Someone spends a lot of money on a car. Later, they realize it's unreliable, but instead of admitting it was a bad purchase, they say, it has character, or it's a classic. They focus on small positives to cover a larger mistake. Again, it's not about logic. It's about protecting the self from regret. In groups, this pattern grows stronger. When people tie their identity to a belief, politics, religion, culture, challenges feel personal. A new idea becomes a threat, not just to knowledge, but to belonging. So when someone from the outside says your group was wrong, the response is often denial, not reflection. The discomfort is too high. So people double down. They find ways to reinterpret the facts or attack the source. That's how cognitive dissonance fuels denial. Denial isn't always loud or defiant. Sometimes it sounds like doubt. Are you sure? That doesn't sound right. It's a way to pause the discomfort, to avoid the leap. People delay change by raising questions, even when they have the answer. The questions aren't meant to find truth. They're meant to hold the truth back. Dissonance can also keep people in roles they no longer believe in. A soldier begins to question the war he fights in. A priest loses faith in the doctrine he preaches. A police officer sees injustice from within. They face a deep divide between who they are and what they do. To quit might cost them identity, income, status. So they stay. And to stay, they change their thoughts. They tell themselves it's for the greater good, or that change must come from the inside. These stories soften the pain. Parents face this too. They raise children a certain way. Later, they hear those methods were harmful. Maybe they hit, shamed, or ignored. The facts say one thing, but their memory says another. They don't want to see themselves as bad parents, so they say, that's how I was raised, or it made them stronger. These aren't conclusions drawn from data. They're beliefs shaped by the need to feel okay. Even scientists and doctors fall into this trap. A doctor uses a treatment for years, then a study shows it doesn't work. Accepting that means admitting to years of failure. That's a hard truth, so some resist the study. They question the data. They point to patients who seemed to improve. They're not lying. They're protecting their view of themselves as healers. Cognitive dissonance doesn't mean people are weak. It means they're human. The mind wants a stable picture of the self, one where actions, beliefs, and values line up. When they don't, something has to give. And often the easiest thing to change is not behavior, but belief. Sometimes dissonance leads to growth. A person sees the gap between who they are and who they want to be. They sit with the discomfort, they admit the truth, they change, but that takes effort. It takes time, and it often hurts. So many choose the shortcut. They rewrite the story, they bend the truth just enough to make it fit. You can't escape cognitive dissonance, but you can recognize it. You can pause when you feel the need to explain something away. You can ask, what am I trying to protect? The answer is often not the belief, but the image you have of yourself. When people deny wrongdoing, it's not always because they don't see it. It's because admitting it would break something inside. The mind resists that break. It builds defenses, it tells stories, and it believes those stories because the truth feels too costly. Even groups of people can do this together. A nation faces its past. Genocide, slavery, conquest. The facts are clear, but admitting them means changing the story the country tells about itself. So the dissonance rises. People say it wasn't that bad, or that was a long time ago. These are not arguments, they're shields, built not on reason, but on the need to feel good. Cognitive dissonance shows how fragile the truth can be, not because it's hidden, but because it hurts. And when it hurts, people look for comfort. They bend facts, shift blame, or deny it altogether, not to deceive others, but to protect themselves, to keep the world and their place in it from falling apart. You get a promotion, it comes with more money, a better title, and a corner office. For a few weeks, maybe even a few months, you feel excited. You wake up with energy, you tell your friends, you imagine your life is finally on track. Then slowly, the feeling fades. The office feels normal. The money doesn't feel like extra. You stop thinking about the title. You're back where you started, not in your job, but in your mood. That's hedonic adaptation. Hedonic adaptation is the tendency for people to return to a stable level of happiness, even after major positive or negative events. Something good happens. It lifts your mood. But your mind adjusts. It stops treating the change as special. It folds it into the background. The same thing happens when something bad occurs. You lose something. You feel down. But over time, your mind pulls you back up to where you were. Your baseline holds steady. People often chase happiness by changing their circumstances. They buy new things. They travel. They move to new cities. These changes feel good at first, but the boost wears off. What once felt exciting now feels routine. The new car becomes the car. The new house becomes the house. The mind stops reacting to the novelty. It says, this is normal now. And once it feels normal, it no longer brings the same pleasure. Imagine you win the lottery. Overnight, your financial problems disappear. You buy what you want. You take the trips. You move into a better home. At first, you feel joy, maybe even disbelief. But researchers who study happiness find that within a year or two, most lottery winners report similar levels of happiness to what they had before. Their lives change, but their mood settles. Not because the money disappears, but because their mind adapts. The thrill fades. What once amazed them becomes the new baseline. The same thing happens in relationships. In the early stages, you feel a rush. You notice everything, a glance, a touch, a shared laugh. But with time, the excitement dulls. You get used to each other. You stop noticing small gestures. You stop feeling the early spark. It doesn't mean the love is gone. It means your mind has adjusted. The novelty that once fueled your feelings is no longer new. Hedonic adaptation explains why people often feel restless, even after getting what they wanted. You tell yourself, if I just had X, I'd be happy. Then you get it, and you are, briefly. But the high doesn't last. You start looking for the next thing. A better job, a bigger house, another goal. You think the next achievement will bring lasting joy, but it follows the same pattern. You get it, you feel good, then you adapt, and the search continues. This process doesn't mean change is pointless. It means you can't expect any single change to fix how you feel long-term. Your baseline stays mostly the same. That's part of how the brain protects itself. It keeps you stable. It stops you from falling too far or flying too high. But that stability also makes lasting fulfillment harder to hold. Negative events also follow this pattern. You lose your job, a relationship ends, you feel crushed. For a time, your mood drops. Life feels harder. But in many cases, people bounce back. The loss becomes part of their story, but not the whole story. They adjust, they find new routines, they find small joys again. The mind works to restore balance. It doesn't erase the pain, but it dulls it. That's adaptation in the other direction. You might expect someone who becomes disabled to stay unhappy, but studies show otherwise. Many people with permanent injuries report normal levels of happiness after enough time has passed. They find ways to adapt. They adjust expectations. They find meaning in new areas. The event changes their lives, but not always their overall mood in the long run. This process happens whether you notice it or not. You don't have to try to adapt. Your brain does it for you. It's built in. But that can lead to confusion. You work hard to reach a goal, thinking it will bring lasting satisfaction. When it doesn't, you assume something's wrong. You didn't aim high enough. You didn't get enough praise. So you aim again. You repeat the cycle. Not because you're greedy, but because you're wired to reset. You can see this in everyday things. You buy a new phone. It looks sleek. It feels fast. You take care of it. Then a few weeks pass. You stop noticing the screen. You drop it without thinking. You don't feel the same excitement. You want a newer one. The object didn't change, your mind did. The danger in this pattern is that it can make you feel like you're always falling short. You keep reaching, but you never arrive. The finish line keeps moving. You meet your goals, but they don't feel like enough. You wonder why you're still not content. But the answer isn't that you're doing it wrong. The answer is that your brain is doing what it's designed to do. Not everyone has the same baseline. Some people are more cheerful by nature. Others tend toward anxiety or gloom. Genetics, environment, and personality all play a role. But within each person, the pattern holds. You return to your own level. You rise and fall, but you hover around a set point. Knowing this doesn't make the pattern go away, but it can help you understand your own behavior. You can see that chasing big rewards won't bring lasting peace. You can also stop blaming yourself when the thrill wears off. It's not your failure, it's adaptation. Some people try to fight the pattern by adding novelty. They travel often, they take on new challenges, they seek out stimulation. This works, temporarily. But novelty has a cost. It requires constant effort, and eventually, even novelty becomes routine. You can't outpace your own mind. Others turn inward. They shift focus from excitement to meaning, from short bursts of pleasure to deeper forms of satisfaction, connection, purpose, growth. These things don't stop adaptation, but they give it less control. They offer a steadier kind of contentment, not built on newness, but on depth. You might notice it in small habits: helping someone, learning something new, spending time with people who matter. These don't produce the same spike as a promotion or a new car, but they don't fade as fast either. They hold their value longer. They give the mind less to adapt to because they're not about flash, they're about substance. Hedonic adaptation can feel like a trap, but it's also a guide. It tells you that lasting joy doesn't come from getting more. It comes from knowing how your mind works, from noticing when you've adapted, from choosing how to respond, not with endless chasing, but with awareness. You don't have to escape the baseline. You just have to see it for what it is. A dog is placed in a cage with a floor that gives mild electric shocks. There's no pattern, no escape, no way to make it stop. The dog whines, runs around, tries to avoid it. Nothing works. Eventually, it lies down and stops moving. Later, the setup changes. Now, the dog could jump over a low barrier to avoid the shock. But it doesn't try. It stays where it is. It has learned that nothing it does matters. That's learned helplessness. The term came from experiments like this one. Psychologists Martin Seligman and Stephen Mayer first described it in the 1960s. They saw that when animals faced repeated stress with no control, they gave up. Even when control returned, they acted as if it hadn't. They had learned to be helpless. This same pattern shows up in people. A student fails test after test, even when she studies. She starts to believe she's just not smart. One day, a teacher offers extra help, but the student shrugs and doesn't take it. Not because she doesn't care, because she doesn't think it will change anything. Learned helplessness doesn't come from laziness or weakness. It comes from experience. When someone tries and fails enough times, the mind starts to rewrite the story. Instead of, "This is hard," it becomes, "I can't do this." Instead of, "The situation is bad," it becomes, "I am the problem." That belief sticks. It changes how a person sees every challenge after that. Even when a real chance to improve appears, they don't take it because they've stopped believing they have a say. Picture someone in an abusive relationship. They try to leave. They ask for help. They make plans. But each time, the situation pulls them back. Maybe their partner threatens them. Maybe the people they count on say, "It's not that bad." Over time, they stop trying. They stay. From the outside, people ask, why don't they just leave? But by then, the person doesn't see the door as open. They've learned it leads nowhere. This kind of helplessness can settle in deeply. It shows up in jobs, in school, in health, in politics. A worker faces a toxic boss. They speak up. Nothing changes. They go to HR. Still nothing. Eventually, they give up and keep their head down. They feel stuck, but not because they like it. They just don't see the point of fighting anymore. A patient struggles with chronic pain. They see doctor after doctor. They try different treatments. Nothing helps. Eventually, they stop seeking care. They say, "It's just how it is." They live with pain that might be manageable because they don't believe anyone can help. That's not apathy. It's a defense. It protects them from more disappointment. People with learned helplessness often stop before they start. A man wants to lose weight. He's tried before. The diets didn't work. The exercise didn't stick, so this time he doesn't bother. Not because he doesn't want change, but because he's sure it won't happen. He avoids trying, so he doesn't have to face another failure. This shows up in classrooms too. A child struggles to read. Other kids tease him. The teacher rushes ahead. The child starts acting out. He stops doing homework. People say he's lazy, but he's not. He's discouraged. He feels like no matter what he does, he'll fall behind. So he chooses the one thing he can control. He stops trying. Learned helplessness reshapes the way people see the world. It doesn't just say, "You can't win." It says, "You can't win, and that will never change." That belief spreads. A woman is passed over for a promotion, then another. She starts to believe she's not leadership material. That belief doesn't stay in the office. It follows her home, into friendships, into her view of herself. Even when new opportunities show up, she shrinks from them. Not because she lacks skills, but because she doesn't see herself as someone who succeeds. The risk of trying and failing again feels worse than the pain of staying small, so she stays small. In politics, learned helplessness affects whole communities. People vote, nothing improves. They protest, they're ignored, services stay broken, schools stay underfunded. After a while, turnout drops. People stop engaging, not because they don't care, but because they've been taught by events that their voices don't count. The system works best when people believe in it. But when that belief breaks, helplessness takes its place. It's not always visible. Someone with learned helplessness might look calm. They go through the motions, they do the bare minimum. They say, it is what it is. But under that calm is a quiet resignation. They've decided that effort doesn't lead to change. Breaking out of learned helplessness takes more than willpower. It takes real experiences of success. A teacher who slows down and gives the struggling student a clear win. A manager who follows through when a worker speaks up. A counselor who helps someone leave an abusive home and stay safe afterward. These small wins start to shift the story. They show the person that effort can matter. But early on, those offers of help might not work. The person might reject them, not because they don't want change, but because they don't trust it. They've learned to expect the worst, so they protect themselves from hope. Because hope, in their experience, leads to pain. This mindset doesn't just fade. It has to be unlearned. And unlearning takes time. It takes proof. The brain needs to see that action leads to result, that choices lead to change, that control exists, even in small ways. Therapists see this with trauma. A client may say, I can't fix this, or that's just how I am. They're not being dramatic, they're telling the truth as they've lived it. The first goal is not to fix everything. It's to help them see that one step matters, that not all doors are locked. In some cases, medication or therapy helps shift the baseline. In others, change begins with structure. A daily walk, a new routine, a goal they can reach. The goal isn't big. The goal is to show that effort counts, that the story they've been living, I don't matter, nothing works, is not the only story. Even self-talk plays a role. Someone who's stuck might say, what's the point, every day? That phrase becomes a habit. They say it before trying, before thinking. Catching that habit is part of the work. Replacing it with, I'll try and see what happens, may seem small, but it's a crack in the wall. The hardest part of learned helplessness is that it feels true. It's not just a thought, it's a learned response. That's what makes it so strong. But it is learned, and anything learned can be unlearned. Not through force, through patience, through real experiences, through people who stay when others leave. The mind holds on to what it knows. And if it has known powerlessness for too long, it will keep acting like power doesn't exist. Even when it does, even when the cage door is open, the person stays still, not because they want to, because they've forgotten how to move. A woman walks home late at night and gets attacked. The next day, someone says, why was she out so late? A man loses his job after speaking up about unsafe conditions. People say, he should have kept quiet. A child grows up in poverty. Strangers say, well, where are the parents? These reactions come quickly. They sound like concern, but they carry blame. Not for the attacker, not for the boss, not for the system, but for the person who suffered. That's the just world hypothesis at work. The just world hypothesis is the belief that the world is fair, that people get what they deserve, that good is rewarded and bad is punished. At first, it sounds comforting. It says life follows rules, that if you act right, things will turn out fine. But that belief has a cost. When bad things happen to good people, it creates tension. And to ease that tension, the mind looks for reasons. Not in the world, but in the victim. A student drops out of college because he has to take care of his sick parent. He works night shifts, falls behind in class, and fails. People say he should have tried harder. No one asks why a teenager had to work 2 jobs to survive. No one looks at the policies that gave him no support. The blame lands on him because it's easier to believe he failed than to admit the world did. This belief often hides in plain sight. A homeless man stands on the corner. People say, he must have done something to end up there. That feels safer than thinking it could happen to anyone. If we believe people cause their own suffering, then we feel protected. It means we have control. It means we won't end up in the same place because we're different. But the truth is, people lose homes for all kinds of reasons. Medical bills, layoffs, divorce, eviction, addiction, mental illness. The system fails them in quiet ways. But if we believe the world is fair, then those failures must be earned. So we say, he should have saved more. She made bad choices. We invent flaws to fit the outcome. The same thing happens in courts. A woman reports sexual assault. People ask, what was she wearing? Or did she lead him on? The questions sound neutral, but they carry judgment. They place the spotlight on her behavior, not his. That's not about logic. That's about the need to protect a belief. If we admit that she did nothing wrong, then we also admit that safety is not guaranteed. And that thought is hard to hold. This pattern shows up early. Children watch cartoons where the villain falls and the hero wins. They hear adults say, "You reap what you sow." These messages shape how they see the world. A child sees another kid fall off a bike and says, "That's what happens when you go too fast." The cause and effect might be true, but the tone shows something deeper. It says, "You brought this on yourself." When someone succeeds, we call them hardworking. When someone fails, we call them lazy. Sometimes those labels fit, but often we apply them to protect a simple story. Effort brings success. If that story breaks, we face harder truths, like how chance, privilege, or systemic inequality shape results. And that means some people suffer through no fault of their own. That's not a fair world. That's a hard world. Look at health. A person gets sick. Maybe they ate well, exercised, avoided stress, but the illness comes anyway. People ask, did he smoke? Did she eat too much sugar? These questions serve a purpose. They help the person asking feel safe. If they can find a cause in the victim's choices, then they feel less at risk. But illness doesn't always follow rules, and blaming the sick won't make anyone safer. The just world belief also shows up in how people respond to poverty. A single mother applies for assistance. She gets food stamps. People call her lazy. They say she should get a real job. They ignore the cost of childcare, the low wages, the housing crisis. They reduce her life to a character flaw. Not because it's accurate, but because it keeps the world simple. If she deserves her struggle, then we don't have to fix the system. You see the same logic in schools. A kid gets labeled a troublemaker. Teachers expect less. The system tracks him into low-level classes. Years later, he drops out. People say he was never motivated. But motivation doesn't grow in isolation. It grows from support, structure, and belief. He didn't fail because he deserved to. He failed because no one gave him a real chance. In disasters, this belief gets louder. A hurricane hits. A family loses everything. The response is, why didn't they evacuate? That question assumes they had the means to leave. A car, gas, a place to go. But many don't. They stay because they have no choice. The just world mindset ignores that. It looks for a flaw in the victim, not a gap in the system. Even when someone dies, the belief shows up. People say he shouldn't have been there or she took the wrong risk. It's a way of saying that couldn't happen to me. It's a defense against fear. If the world punishes only the unwise, then the wise are safe. But that's not how the world works. Good people suffer, careful people die, smart people fail, and no belief changes that. The danger of the just world hypothesis is not just that it's wrong, it's that it stops change. If people get what they deserve, then there's nothing to fix. No reason to question power. No reason to examine inequality. The problem becomes personal, not structural. The answer becomes individual effort, not collective action. This mindset punishes victims twice. First, they suffer the event. Then they carry the blame. They lose empathy from others. They lose support. They begin to believe the story themselves. Maybe it is my fault. Maybe I deserve this. The damage deepens. People don't hold this belief because they're cruel. They hold it because they want order. They want to believe that the world is a safe place, that effort brings reward, that justice prevails. Those hopes are natural, but when they harden into dogma, they blind us. They stop us from seeing real pain caused by systems that don't care what we deserve. A just world is worth working toward. But pretending we already live in one only helps those who benefit from the way things are. It tells everyone else to suffer quietly and to blame themselves for the harm they didn't cause. You believe something. Maybe it's political. Maybe it's personal. You feel sure you're right. You go online and search for articles. You click on the ones that match your view. You scroll past the ones that don't. When you find a headline that proves your point, you feel a rush of confidence. You think, I knew it. That's confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is the tendency to seek out and favor information that supports what you already believe. It's not a conscious lie. It's a mental shortcut. It helps the brain make sense of a world full of noise. But it also makes people blind to truth when the truth goes against their expectations. Imagine someone who believes that vaccines are dangerous. They search vaccine risks instead of vaccine safety. They find blogs, videos, and message boards filled with horror stories. Most of it lacks evidence, but it matches what they believe, so they trust it. If they come across a peer-reviewed study that says vaccines are safe, they ignore it, or they question who funded it. They aren't trying to deceive anyone. They're trying to make the world make sense without shaking their core belief. This pattern doesn't happen just with big issues. It shows up in small decisions. A man thinks his coworker doesn't like him. He starts noticing every time she frowns. He forgets the time she smiles. He hears her tone as cold, even when she says something neutral. He adds up all the moments that fit his story. The rest get filtered out. Over time, he feels more and more certain. But his certainty isn't built on a full picture. It's built on selected facts. Confirmation bias works like a filter. It lets through what supports you and blocks what challenges you. It feels like learning, but it's really reinforcement. You don't grow, you just repeat. Over time, beliefs harden. You stop testing them, you protect them. In arguments, you see this clearly. Two people can read the same article and walk away with opposite conclusions. Not because one of them didn't understand, but because each read it through a different lens. They highlight different parts. They trust different sources. They doubt what doesn't fit. A woman believes her diet is the best for health. She reads a headline that says her eating plan lowers heart disease. She shares it. She doesn't check if the study was small or flawed. Later, someone shows her new research that challenges the diet. She says, "That study must be biased." The trust and doubt don't come from the evidence, they come from the outcome. If it agrees, it's true. If it doesn't, it's suspect. Even scientists fall into this. A researcher forms a theory, they test it. The data comes back mixed. Some points match the theory, others don't. The temptation is to focus on what fits, to explain away the rest. Good science resists this, but humans struggle with it. The brain wants consistency. It wants to believe what it already believes. Social media makes this worse. Algorithms show you what you like. If you click on one video that matches your view, the system gives you more. You end up in a loop. Every post agrees with you. Every comment cheers you on. You feel like your side is obvious, that anyone who disagrees must be blind, dishonest, or evil. But that feeling comes not from balance. It comes from a wall of sameness. People often say they want the truth, but what many want is the feeling of being right. That feeling is safer. It protects your identity. If you see yourself as smart, kind, or thoughtful, you want your beliefs to match that. If someone shows you a fact that makes you question your view, it's not just the belief at risk, it's your self-image. So instead of changing your mind, you question the fact. This happens in relationships too. A person believes their partner is selfish, so they focus on every small slight, a forgotten errand, a curt reply. They overlook the times their partner made sacrifices, cooked dinner, stayed up late to listen. They collect evidence for one story and ignore the other. Over time, the bias shapes the relationship. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more you see selfishness, the more distant you feel. The more distant you feel, the more selfish the other person seems. Confirmation bias also plays a role in prejudice. Someone thinks a certain group is lazy or dishonest. So every time they see one person from that group do something wrong, it confirms their belief. They ignore the many who work hard or act with integrity. They don't mean to hate, they mean to make the world make sense. But in doing so, they let false ideas harden into convictions. The mind doesn't do this to be malicious. It does it to reduce conflict. Holding two opposing ideas feels uncomfortable. Psychologists call that cognitive dissonance. So the brain solves the discomfort by leaning into one side and pushing the other away. It's faster, it feels better. You can see this in sports fandom. A fan watches their team commit a foul. They say, "It wasn't that bad." When the other team does the same thing, they yell, "Cheap shot!" The call changes depending on the jersey. The bias is automatic. The loyalty shapes perception. Confirmation bias also explains why conspiracy theories spread. Once someone believes a theory, every piece of evidence gets twisted to support it. If a news outlet says the theory is false, They say the outlet is part of the cover-up. The theory becomes unfalsifiable. The bias seals it off from challenge. Breaking out of confirmation bias takes effort. It means looking for disconfirming evidence. It means reading things that make you uncomfortable. It means sitting with the thought, I might be wrong. That's not easy. It feels like a threat, but it's the only way to grow. It helps to ask questions like, what would change my mind? If the answer is nothing, you're not thinking, you're defending. Real thinking stays open. It checks both sides. It tests itself. Some people build habits around this. They read sources they disagree with. They argue in good faith. They try to understand, not just win. That doesn't mean they lack conviction. It means they value truth more than comfort. Confirmation bias won't go away. It's part of how the mind works. But you can notice it. You can pause when you feel that rush of agreement. You can ask, am I learning or just nodding along? That question won't erase the bias, but it opens a window. And sometimes, a small window is enough to let in something new. A group of smart people sits around a table. They all work for the same company. They've been told to solve a problem, maybe launch a new product or respond to a crisis. Someone has doubts. They think the plan has risks, but they stay quiet. They don't want to slow things down. They don't want to look negative. Others nod along. They say things like, looks good to me, and let's move forward. No one questions the leader. No one raises concerns. The plan moves ahead. Later, it fails, badly. People ask, how did no one see this coming? The answer is groupthink. Groupthink happens when a group values harmony more than clear thinking. The members don't want conflict. They want to agree. So they push aside doubts, ignore warnings, and stop testing ideas. They don't do it on purpose. They believe they're being good team players. But in trying to stay united, they often make bad decisions. The term came from psychologist Irving Janis. He studied how political and military groups made decisions. One of his key examples was the Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961. A group of advisors and officials under President Kennedy approved a plan to invade Cuba with a small force. The plan was shaky from the start. Some people in the room had doubts, but they didn't speak up. They thought others knew more. They didn't want to challenge authority. The plan failed. It became a major embarrassment. Janis showed how the group's desire for agreement blocked critical thinking. Groupthink isn't just about agreeing. It's about pressure, often subtle, not to disagree. The leader may not say, don't argue, but their tone, their confidence, their reactions send a signal. If someone speaks up and gets brushed off or ignored, others get the message, don't make waves. In some cases, the group believes its own hype. They think they're too smart to be wrong. That belief creates overconfidence. They stop checking facts. They stop looking for weak spots. They trust each other too much. And they stop trusting outside voices. Imagine a company planning a new product. The marketing team says customers want it. The design team says it's ready. The finance team approves the budget. One junior analyst notices a trend in the data. It suggests the product may not do well. But when she shares her concern, she gets a polite nod and a quick, we've already accounted for that. The project moves forward. It launches. It flops. Later, someone remembers her warning, but by then, it's too late. In groupthink, the signs were there, but no one acted on them, either because they didn't want to cause conflict or because they assumed someone else was handling it. This isn't laziness. It's a kind of unspoken deal. I'll support your view if you support mine. That deal keeps things smooth until they fall apart. Groupthink thrives in tight-knit teams, especially those with strong leaders or a clear mission. The more people value belonging, the harder it is to disagree. A new team member may feel pressure to prove loyalty. A veteran may fear rocking the boat. A boss may shut down debate without meaning to, just by looking impatient when someone raises a hard question. In some cases, the group silences itself. No one tells them to. They just feel it. They sense that disagreement will make things harder, so they choose silence. They might even doubt themselves. If no one else is worried, maybe I'm wrong. You can see this in politics. A group of lawmakers supports a new policy. One of them thinks it might hurt a vulnerable group. But they vote yes anyway. They don't want to be the only ones saying no. They tell themselves it's a small issue. They focus on the bigger goal. But later, when the harm becomes clear, people ask why no one spoke up. Or in a jury room. 11 jurors agree on a verdict. One doesn't. They're unsure. They think there's reasonable doubt, but they face pressure. The others look annoyed. The person starts to doubt their own judgment. They don't want to hold everyone up. They change their vote, not because they're convinced, but because they want the group to move on. Groupthink doesn't always lead to disaster, but it often leads to missed chances. Bad ideas go unchallenged. Good ideas stay hidden. People leave the room feeling uneasy, but no one knows why. The group loses the benefit of different views. It runs on momentum, not insight. It also creates false consensus. People think they agree more than they do. If no one speaks up, silence looks like approval. That shapes how decisions unfold. The leader thinks everyone's on board and pushes ahead. But the silence may not mean support. It may mean fear. Groupthink feels safe in the moment. It avoids conflict. It makes meetings faster. It creates the image of unity, but it builds risk over time. Because problems don't go away when you ignore them. They grow. Breaking groupthink takes effort. It means creating space for disagreement. A leader has to ask hard questions and mean it. They have to reward honest feedback, not punish it. They have to show they value truth more than agreement. Even then, people may hesitate, so the structure has to help. Bring in outside voices. Ask someone to play devil's advocate. Give people time to think before speaking. Let them write down concerns. Make sure silence doesn't become the only answer. The danger of groupthink isn't just bad decisions. It's what people learn. They learn that honesty carries risk, that raising doubts gets you ignored, that teams value comfort more than clarity. Once that belief sets in, it shapes every future decision. It teaches people to check their minds at the door. When things go wrong, everyone wonders how it happened. They replay the moments. They remember the red flags. They realize someone almost said something. Someone almost stopped it. But almost doesn't matter. Not in hindsight. The group wanted harmony. They got it, at a cost. A child loves to draw. She picks up crayons during quiet time and sketches animals, houses, whatever comes to mind. No one asks her to. She does it because it feels good. Then one day, a teacher starts giving her gold stars every time she finishes a drawing. At first, she's excited. She draws more. But over time, something shifts. She stops drawing unless there's a reward. If no one hands her a star, she puts the crayons down. What started as play now feels like work. That's the overjustification effect. The overjustification effect happens when people receive external rewards for something they already enjoy. The reward doesn't strengthen motivation, it replaces it. The person no longer acts for the sake of the activity itself. They act for the prize. And when the prize disappears, so does the motivation. This effect shows up early. Children who love reading sometimes lose interest when schools give them points or pizza coupons for every book they finish. What was once fun becomes a transaction. Instead of wondering what story they'll dive into next, they start thinking about how to hit a goal. When the rewards stop, the habit often fades. The joy gets lost in the system. The same pattern plays out in adults. A person likes jogging in the morning. It clears their head. Then they buy a fitness tracker that gives them badges for hitting certain targets. At first, it adds excitement, but one day they miss a goal. The badge doesn't appear. They feel like they failed. Slowly, they stop jogging on days they know they won't hit the mark. What was once a break becomes a scoreboard. People don't always notice this change. It happens gradually. The brain rewires its reason for doing something. The source of action shifts from inside to outside. From I want to I have to. From interest to expectation. Employers often use rewards to motivate behavior. Bonuses, commissions, and praise all seem like good tools. And they can work short term. But when the reward becomes the reason, the job becomes mechanical. A worker who once took pride in solving problems may stop doing anything outside their target metrics. If a task doesn't lead to a bonus, it feels like a waste of time. Even if it helps the team or improves the process, it gets ignored. This creates a problem for leadership. They think they're boosting morale with rewards, but they may be training people to care less about the work itself. The rewards shape behavior, but not belief. As soon as the reward changes or disappears, the motivation drops. Not because the task changed, but because the meaning did. Overjustification doesn't just erode motivation, it opens the door to manipulation. If people act mainly for rewards, then whoever controls the rewards controls the behavior. That may sound efficient, but it makes people easier to steer toward goals that aren't always their own. A company launches a contest. Whoever sells the most gets a trip. Employees compete hard. Some cut corners, some pressure customers, some hide problems. The trip becomes the focus. The quality of service suffers. Once the contest ends, so does the extra effort. The behavior was never about values. It was about the prize. This shows up in schools too. Students who get graded on every assignment start asking, is this for points? They calculate effort. If the answer is no, many don't bother. The idea that learning might be valuable on its own gets lost. Instead, it becomes a game of points, a system to navigate, not a process to enjoy. Even praise can backfire. A child gets told they're smart every time they solve a math problem. Soon they start avoiding hard problems. They stick to what they know. Because failure would threaten the label. They're no longer solving for curiosity. They're solving to protect their identity. When the work gets tough, they quit, not because they're lazy, but because they've learned that praise depends on success. People in relationships can fall into this too. A person might give affection when their partner behaves a certain way. The reward becomes a tool. Over time, the other partner starts acting more for approval than connection. They ask, did I do good, instead of, was that the right thing to do? The relationship becomes a set of conditions. This isn't about avoiding all rewards. Sometimes they're needed. Sometimes they help start a habit. But if they become the main reason someone acts, the behavior becomes fragile. It depends on the next treat, not on lasting meaning. You can test this yourself. Think about something you used to enjoy, a hobby, a subject, a type of work. Then think about what changed when someone started attaching a reward to it. Did you feel more pressure? Did you lose interest when the reward stopped? Did you stop doing it just for its own sake? Athletes go through this. A person who grew up loving a sport may lose the joy after years of performance pressure. They start seeing games as evaluations, not expressions. They play for scholarships or approval or rankings, not for play. And when the season ends, they feel relief, not loss. The Overjustification Effect reminds us how motivation works. Intrinsic motivation comes from interest, purpose, and satisfaction. Extrinsic motivation comes from rewards or punishment. Both have a role, but they don't work the same way. One builds lasting drive. The other often creates short-term action with long-term cost. When people act for internal reasons, they take ownership. They feel connected to what they do. They explore more. They risk more. They learn more. When people act only for rewards, they follow the path laid out. They hit the target, but they don't go beyond it. They become efficient, but not engaged. This is why some of the most driven people don't need rewards. They do hard things because they care. They build things because they're curious. They serve others because it feels right. Not because someone's watching. Not because someone might clap. Once you understand the Overjustification Effect, you start to notice where rewards help and where they hurt. You see when they spark effort and when they replace meaning. You see how easy it is to train someone out of caring. Not with force, with praise, with prizes, with the quiet message, you should only do this if there's something in it for you. And once that message lands, it's hard to unlearn. A woman notices things in her home feel off. A lamp is in a different place. A drawer she closed is now open. She asks her partner about it. He laughs and says, "You must be imagining things." She starts to doubt herself. Maybe she is, maybe she's just tired. But it keeps happening. She keeps noticing small changes. He keeps saying it's all in her head. Over time, she stops trusting her memory. She stops asking questions. She starts to believe she's the problem. That's gaslighting. Gaslighting is a form of psychological manipulation where one person makes another doubt their perception of reality. It's not just lying. It's deeper than that. It's a pattern. The gaslighter denies things they did, shifts blame, rewrites events, and chips away at the victim's confidence in their own mind. The goal is control. It often starts small. Someone forgets a promise they made. You bring it up. They say, "That never happened," or "You always twist things." You feel confused. You were sure they said it, but they sound so certain. They speak with confidence. You question yourself. You let it go. That's the first step. Gaslighting works because people want to make sense of their world. They want to believe those close to them mean well. When someone you care about tells you you're wrong again and again, you start to believe them. Not because the facts support it, but because the relationship depends on it. Imagine a friend who constantly cancels plans. You mention it. They say, "You're too sensitive. I never said I'd come every time." You start to wonder if you're being unfair. You reread old texts. They did say they'd be there. But you let it slide. You tell yourself, maybe I misunderstood. That's how gaslighting grows. It doesn't take one big lie. It takes repeated small ones that pile up. In intimate relationships, it can become dangerous. A partner cheats, then blames you for being insecure. You find proof, messages, receipts. They say those don't mean anything. You're paranoid. They accuse you of being controlling, of being jealous. You start apologizing for asking questions. The truth becomes harder to hold. Your mind splits. One part knows what happened, the other part is desperate to keep the peace. Gaslighting often comes with isolation. The gaslighter may say, "Your friends don't really care about you," or "Your family always makes things worse." Over time, you pull away from people who might give you another perspective. Without those voices, the gaslighter's version of events becomes the only one you hear. They may also twist your emotions against you. You get upset. They say, "You're overreacting." You cry. They say, "You're being dramatic." You get angry. They say, "See, you're crazy." Every normal emotional response becomes more proof that you're the problem. That keeps you in a cycle where you can't win. If you speak up, you're wrong. If you stay quiet, they're right. This pattern doesn't only happen in personal relationships. It can show up at work. A boss sets you up to fail, then says you're not a team player. You bring up missing information. They say, "I told you, you just weren't paying attention." You ask for feedback. They give none. Later, they say, "I already explained that." You start second-guessing your skills. You work longer hours trying to make up for mistakes you didn't actually make. In group settings, gaslighting can become cultural. A community might ignore or deny harm done to certain people. A person brings up discrimination. The group says, "You're imagining it," or "You're playing the victim." That person starts to wonder if they're being too sensitive, if their experience is valid. They stop speaking up. They start questioning what they know. Gaslighting doesn't need anger. Sometimes it comes with calm. The gaslighter may speak in a soft voice. They may seem logical, measured, even caring. They say things like, "I'm just trying to help," or "You know I love you." That makes it harder to spot. It makes the victim feel guilty for even thinking something is wrong. Over time, gaslighting erodes a person's sense of self. They lose confidence in their memory, judgment, and feelings. They start relying on the gaslighter to tell them what's real. That makes them easier to control. Not because they're weak, but because they've been trained to doubt their own mind. A common tactic is rewriting history. You bring up a past argument. They say that's not what happened. You remember them yelling. They say they never raised their voice. You start wondering if you exaggerated it. Maybe you did. Maybe you're too emotional. That thought takes root. Another tactic is redirecting blame. You say, "That hurt me." They say, "You hurt me first." You say, "You lied to me." They say, "You're just trying to make me look bad." Every time you raise an issue, it becomes about you. Your pain gets deflected. Your words get turned around. Gaslighting thrives in unequal power dynamics. The person doing it often holds more influence, control, or authority. That could be a partner, a parent, a boss, or a public figure. They use that position to define what counts as real. And the person being gaslit often wants to maintain the relationship, job, or connection. That desire makes them more vulnerable to manipulation. People often ask, why didn't they just leave? But by the time the person sees what's happening, their ability to trust themselves is damaged. They don't leave because they're unsure of their instincts. They've been told over and over that they misinterpret things, that they cause problems, that they're unstable. Those beliefs take hold. Recognizing gaslighting starts with noticing the confusion. Do you often feel like you have to apologize for things you don't remember doing wrong? Do you find yourself keeping secrets about the way someone talks to you? Do you replay conversations in your head, wondering if you imagined parts of them? That fog, that hesitation, is often a sign. Gaslighting doesn't always come from cruelty. Sometimes it comes from someone who can't face being wrong, someone who needs control, someone who fears being questioned. But the result is the same. You start to lose your grip on what's real. The damage can be deep. It can outlast the relationship. Even after leaving, people often carry doubt with them. They wonder if they were too sensitive, too difficult, too unstable. They second-guess new relationships. They question every decision. That's what gaslighting does. It makes you afraid of your own mind. And the hardest part is that no one sees it happening from the outside. There are no bruises, no broken things, just a person who slowly grows smaller, quieter, and less sure of the world. They may laugh less, apologize more, and at some point they stop saying what they think because they've learned not to trust their own voice. A woman is held hostage in a bank. She's scared, confused, unsure if she'll survive. The man with the gun keeps her trapped for days, but he also gives her water. He speaks softly. He tells her he doesn't want to hurt anyone. At one point, he shields her from police gunfire. After she's freed, she defends him in interviews. She says he's not a bad person. She says the police were too aggressive. That's Stockholm Syndrome. The term comes from a 1973 bank robbery in Stockholm, Sweden. 2 criminals took 4 employees hostage for 6 days. During that time, the hostages began to show sympathy for their captors. They resisted rescue efforts. They later refused to testify against the men who had held them at gunpoint. One woman even raised money for their legal defense. The behavior shocked the public. Experts searched for an explanation. They found one in survival. Stockholm Syndrome isn't about logic. It's not a conscious choice. It's a defense. When someone loses control, their brain looks for a way to stay safe. In a hostage situation, the captor holds all the power. They decide who eats, who sleeps, who lives. The victim may realize their only chance of survival is to cooperate, to please, to become less of a threat. In doing so, they may start to see the captor not just as a danger, but also as a protector. This switch doesn't mean the victim forgets the threat. It means the mind rewrites the threat in a more manageable way. It focuses on moments of kindness. A captor unties someone's hands. He says, "I don't want to hurt you." The victim grabs onto those words. They become lifelines. If the person with the gun can be reasoned with, maybe there's hope. That belief makes the terror feel less overwhelming. It brings order to chaos. The bond that forms isn't real affection. It's a survival mechanism. But over time, it can feel real. It can reshape how the victim sees the whole situation. They stop seeing themselves as trapped. They start seeing themselves as chosen, special, different from others who wouldn't have survived. This doesn't only happen in hostage crises. It shows up in abusive relationships. A person stays with someone who hits them, controls them, threatens them. But that same person also brings flowers, apologizes, cries, says, "I love you." The victim clings to those moments. They focus on the good. They downplay the harm. They say, "You don't know him like I do." They defend him to friends and family. They may even feel loyalty toward him, not because they enjoy the abuse, but because they've learned to adapt to it. In some cases, they blame outsiders more than the abuser. A friend tells them to leave. They say, "You're trying to ruin my life." A therapist points out the danger. They say, "You don't understand our bond." That reaction protects the structure that's helped them survive. If they admit the truth, they face the full weight of what they've been through. That can feel unbearable. Children raised by abusive caregivers sometimes form similar bonds. A parent hurts them, then comforts them, then hurts them again. The child starts to believe the comfort means the harm wasn't that bad. They learn not to trust their own pain. They say, "He only hits me when I deserve it." They take responsibility for the abuse. It gives them a sense of control. If it's their fault, then maybe they can stop it. That's easier to accept than total helplessness. Prisoners of war have shown signs of Stockholm Syndrome. They thank their captors. They refuse to escape. Some adopt the ideology of their jailers. Again, it's not because they forget what happened. It's because their mind reworks the experience to protect itself. To survive long-term captivity, they find reasons to align with the enemy. They say, "He treated me with dignity." That might be true, but it also serves a function. It makes the suffering feel less brutal. The effect doesn't require physical violence. It can come from emotional control. A cult leader isolates followers from the outside world. He tells them the world is evil, that only he can save them. At first, some resist, but over time, they come to depend on him. They call him father. They defend him when others ask questions. They ignore his abuse because they believe he loves them. That belief doesn't grow out of comfort. It grows out of fear and need. Stockholm Syndrome is hard to see from the outside. People say, why would anyone stay in that situation? But from inside, it makes sense. The victim doesn't think they're being manipulated. They think they're surviving. And the longer the imbalance lasts, the harder it becomes to break the bond. Sometimes the victim believes they've changed the abuser, that their love or patience made the captor softer. They say he wasn't like that with others. They take pride in their role. They feel responsible for the abuser's moments of kindness. That belief gives them meaning, but it also traps them deeper. Even after the situation ends, the attachment can linger. A hostage might miss their captor. An abuse survivor might want to return. That doesn't mean they liked being harmed. It means their sense of reality was reshaped. They spent so long trying to read the moods of a dangerous person that they forgot how to feel safe anywhere else. Stockholm Syndrome doesn't mean the person is weak. It means they adapted. The mind will do whatever it takes to reduce fear. If bonding with the captor lowers the threat, the mind will create that bond. Not because it's healthy, because it's useful. In the short term, it may even save their life, but in the long term, it complicates recovery. Breaking that bond takes time. It requires safe spaces, trusted people, and slow rebuilding of reality. It means learning to trust your instincts again. To say, what happened to me was wrong, and to stop carrying the emotional weight of the person who caused the harm. You can't force someone out of Stockholm Syndrome. You can't yell them into seeing clearly. The defense they built is strong. It served a purpose. To dismantle it, they need to feel safe enough to look back and tell the truth. And that truth may take a long time to reach, because for someone who survived through attachment, love and fear became hard to tell apart. A man leaves a comment online about a political issue. It gets a few likes. He assumes most people agree with him. He doesn't stop to ask who didn't click or who read it and rolled their eyes. He starts posting more. Each time he thinks, I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. That's the false consensus effect. The false consensus effect happens when people overestimate how much others share their beliefs, values, or behaviors. It's a mental shortcut. The brain assumes that what feels normal to you must feel normal to most people, that your view is common sense, that if others disagree, they're the ones missing something obvious. But most of the time, the world is more divided than it looks. You see this at work in conversations. A group of coworkers stands around during lunch. One person makes a joke about a manager. Others laugh, maybe out of politeness, maybe because they're nervous. The speaker takes the laughter as agreement. Later, he tells the same joke to someone else who doesn't laugh. He's shocked. He thought everyone felt the same way, but he never actually asked. This effect shows up in politics, religion, social issues, anywhere people have strong views. A person who's deeply against a certain policy believes that most reasonable people would agree. They surround themselves with people who think the same way. They read news that confirms their view. They assume that anyone who disagrees is in the minority, maybe even uneducated or biased. The result is a warped picture of the world. The false consensus effect isn't just about opinions. It shows up in behavior too. A college student skips class and thinks, everyone skips sometimes. A driver cuts someone off and thinks, people drive like this all the time. A smoker believes most people smoke, or at least don't mind it. These thoughts help people justify what they already do. If everyone acts this way, then I'm not doing anything wrong. People want to feel normal. It's uncomfortable to think your view is in the minority. It's easier to assume others think like you. That assumption protects your ego. It makes you feel stable and safe. If you believe your opinions are popular, you feel more confident expressing them. You feel less pressure to change or listen. But that confidence is often misplaced. Imagine a person who believes that working long hours shows commitment. They stay late every night. They assume their coworkers admire this. They think, this is what everyone should be doing. But in reality, their coworkers might see it as unhealthy. They might talk behind closed doors about burnout and poor boundaries. The person never hears this, so they keep pushing. They think they're leading by example, but they're just reinforcing a belief no one shares. The false consensus effect can cause real problems in decision-making. A team leader asks for feedback on a new policy. Most people stay quiet. One person speaks up in support. The leader takes that silence as agreement. They push forward. Later, when the policy fails, they're surprised. They thought the team was on board, but they never checked. It's not just leaders who fall for this. Everyday people do it too. Someone plans a group vacation. They pick the destination, the hotel, the activities. They assume others want the same thing. When people complain, they feel blindsided. Why didn't anyone say anything? But the problem wasn't silence. It was assumption. This kind of thinking narrows perspective. It creates echo chambers. A person posts on social media, gets a few positive comments, and assumes wide support. They double down. They become more certain, more rigid. They forget how many people didn't comment or didn't see the post at all. They mistake a handful of voices for the majority. Sometimes this effect makes people take unnecessary risks. A person believes most people cheat on their taxes. They think it's normal, so they cut corners. Later, when they get audited, they're shocked. Why me? But the truth is, their belief wasn't based on data. It was based on assumption. This pattern can also make people less tolerant. If you think most people agree with you, then disagreement feels like a threat. You start to see people who think differently as outsiders. You stop listening. You argue harder, not better. You talk more, but learn less. The false consensus effect creates a gap, not just between people, but between perception and reality. Even experts fall into this trap. A professor believes that most of their students value academic rigor, so they design a tough course. The feedback comes in. Many students feel overwhelmed. They wanted support, not just standards. The professor is confused. They thought they were giving people what they wanted, but they never asked. They assumed. Surveys and polls often reveal how wrong these assumptions are. People who believe a certain view is widespread are shocked when data shows otherwise. They say, "I thought everyone agreed with me." But everyone usually means the people they talk to, the shows they watch, the voices they hear. It doesn't reflect the full picture. You can see the false consensus effect in small, everyday choices. A person brings a dish to a party that they love and assumes others will too. It sits untouched. Someone starts a group chat and thinks everyone will be excited to use it. No one replies. These aren't big failures, but they come from the same place, believing your preferences are the norm. Sometimes the effect works in reverse. A person feels strongly about something but believes no one else does. They stay quiet. Later, they find out others shared their view but didn't speak up either. Each person thought they were the only one. That silence kept the truth hidden. If even one had spoken up, the whole group might have shifted. The false consensus effect isn't always harmful. Sometimes it builds quick trust. People bond over shared views, real or imagined. But when it goes unchecked, it distorts how people relate to each other. It makes communication harder. It feeds arrogance, error, and conflict. One way to spot it is by noticing how often you say things like, "everyone knows," "nobody thinks that," or "obviously." Those words hint at assumptions. The truth is rarely that simple. People are more divided than we like to admit. And if you're not hearing disagreement, it might not mean agreement. It might mean people don't feel safe enough to speak. Checking for false consensus doesn't mean doubting yourself constantly. It means asking questions. It means listening. It means remembering that your view is one among many, not the default. That awareness doesn't make you weaker. It makes you wiser. A man buys a ticket to a concert. It costs $100. The day of the show, he wakes up sick. He doesn't feel well. It's cold and raining. He doesn't want to go, but he says, "I spent the money. I can't waste it." So he drags himself out, stands in the rain, and feels miserable. That's the sunk cost fallacy. The sunk cost fallacy happens when people continue with something not because it's a good idea now, but because they already spent money, time, or effort on it. The cost is gone. It can't be recovered. But people treat it like it still matters. They think quitting would waste the investment. So they stay the course, even when it hurts. Imagine a couple who's been together for 10 years. They fight often. They've grown apart. Friends and family see the strain. One person considers leaving, but then says, "I've already put so much into this." so they stay. Not because they're happy, but because they feel like walking away would mean those 10 years were for nothing. This way of thinking is common. A business launches a project that starts losing money. The team sees warning signs, but the company has already poured in millions, so they keep going. They hope to turn it around. They say, "We've come too far to quit now." The losses grow. The problem is that past effort doesn't change present reality. The time, money, or energy you've spent is gone. What matters now is whether continuing makes sense based on the current facts. But the brain struggles to let go. It wants to protect the past investment. It treats quitting as failure, even when quitting is the smarter move. You can see this in education. A student picks a major they don't enjoy. 2 years in, they dread every class. They want to switch, but they say, "I've already done half the program." So they stick with it. They graduate with a degree they don't want and enter a career they don't like. Gamblers fall into this trap too. Someone loses money at the slot machine. They keep playing, thinking, "I need to win back what I lost." They believe stopping would waste the earlier bets. But every spin is a new decision. The past losses don't change the odds. Still, the feeling remains. The more they lose, the harder it is to walk away. Even governments fall for sunk costs. A country starts a war based on poor intelligence. The mission drags on. Leaders know it's not working, but they keep sending troops and resources. They say, "We can't stop now, not after everything we've done." The costs grow heavier. The exit becomes harder. The war continues, not because of strategy, but because of pride and fear of admitting a mistake. The sunk cost fallacy feeds on emotion. People don't want to feel like they've wasted something. They don't want to admit they were wrong. So they double down. They stick with bad jobs, bad investments, bad relationships. They say things like, "I've come too far," or "I don't want it all to be for nothing." But sunk costs don't work that way. The past doesn't care about the present. Money spent won't come back. Hours lost won't return. You can't undo what's been done. All you can do is make the next best choice. This fallacy also hides in everyday life. You start a movie. It's boring. You keep watching because you already made it halfway through. You order food you don't like but finish it because you paid for it. You drive an extra 20 minutes to use a coupon that saves $5, even though the gas costs more than that. People often mistake persistence for wisdom. They think grit means pushing through no matter what. But real wisdom is knowing when to stop. Knowing when a plan isn't working. Knowing when the cost of continuing is higher than the cost of quitting. It's not easy. Letting go feels like failure. It stings to walk away from something you cared about. But staying locked into a poor decision doesn't protect the past. It just drags it into the future. A man starts fixing up an old car. He spends thousands on parts. The engine still fails. He keeps going. He says, "I've already spent too much to stop now." But every dollar he adds goes into something he'll never recoup. He ends up with a car that barely runs and a wallet that's empty. The sunk cost fallacy also plays out in technology. A company builds a piece of software. It's flawed from the start. The design is outdated. The market shifts, but they keep funding it. They tell themselves it will pay off eventually. They assign more staff. They market harder. It never takes off. Meanwhile, a better product gets ignored because the team's tied up in the one they've already built. People often say, "Don't quit." But sometimes quitting is the smartest move. It clears the path. It frees up resources. It gives you room to try something else. The key is to ask, would I start this today, knowing what I know now? If the answer is no, it may be time to walk away. This doesn't mean giving up at the first sign of trouble. Hard things are often worth doing. But when the only reason to continue is that you've already spent something, that's a red flag. The investment is gone. What matters is what comes next. Marketers know how to exploit this. They use offers like, "You've already come this far. Don't stop now." They frame choices to make you feel like leaving would waste your earlier steps. Free trials turn into subscriptions because people forget to cancel. Then they stay subscribed because they already paid for the next month. In relationships, people stay in unhappy marriages because of the wedding, the years together, the shared history. They tell themselves leaving would throw it all away. But staying in something that hurts you doesn't make the past better. It just makes the present worse. The sunk cost fallacy feels logical in the moment. It plays to your emotions, but it clouds judgment. It makes you chase a payoff that isn't coming. It makes you value the past more than the present. Being willing to walk away isn't weak. It's a form of strength. It means you've looked at the facts and made a clear choice. It means you value your future more than your pride. It means you know the difference between persistence and stubbornness. You can't change what you've already spent. You can only choose where to spend what you have left. A man starts a business. He works long hours, takes big risks, and builds something successful. He says it's not about money. It's not even about success. It's about pushing past limits, about seeing how far he can go, about shaping the world around his vision. That's the will to power. Nietzsche didn't see people as driven by comfort or safety. He believed the deeper force behind human action was a desire to grow, to expand, to assert. Not just to survive, but to overcome. The will to power isn't about physical strength or control in the usual sense. It's about the drive to shape reality, to turn weakness into strength, to rise above fear and turn it into motion. It sounds noble in parts. A person lifts themselves out of despair. They face failure and keep going. They refuse to live small. They take pain and use it to build something new. That's power, not control over others, but over the self. But the will to power doesn't stop there. When unchecked, it spills over. It becomes domination. It stops being about personal growth and starts being about conquest. One person says, "If I can do it, I should." They stop asking whether their actions are right. They start asking whether they're strong enough to get away with them. This shows up in history again and again. A leader rises to power and begins with promises. Strength, pride, unity. At first, people feel inspired, but then the lines blur. Critics are silenced, borders are crossed. Others are seen not as equals, but as tools or threats. The leader justifies it all by pointing to results. They say weakness is failure, power is proof. Morality takes a back seat to action. Nietzsche wasn't saying this should happen. He was describing what does. He didn't give simple answers. He didn't hand out rules. He wanted people to look harder at their own motives, to ask whether their actions came from fear or from strength, whether their goals served life or drained it. But some take his ideas and twist them. They use the will to power to excuse harm. They say, "I'm not cruel, I'm strong." They step on others and call it progress. They destroy and say it's a form of creation. They treat other people's suffering as a necessary cost. That's not what Nietzsche meant, but it's where the idea can go. A CEO fires half the company to boost profits. He says, "I made a tough call." That's leadership. But the decision wasn't about survival. It was about winning, about pushing numbers, about proving control. When the will to power loses its anchor, it starts to rationalize anything. This mindset can show up in everyday life. A student cheats on a test and says, "The system is broken. I just play to win." A partner manipulates and controls, calling it passion. A politician lies to gain votes, claiming they're doing it for a greater good. All of these follow the same path. The result justifies the method. Power becomes the point. You see this in relationships, especially when one person seeks control. They start by deciding small things, what to eat, where to go. Then they shape how the other person dresses, talks, acts. They call it love, protection, guidance, but it's really about bending someone to their will, about proving they can. The deeper need is not connection, it's dominance. When people chase power without purpose, they lose sight of others. They see life as a game. Other people become obstacles or tools. They stop asking what's fair or kind or just. They only ask, "Does this get me ahead?" That mindset is hard to stop once it starts. Every win makes the person feel more right. Every time they get away with something, it feels like proof. The success becomes its own excuse. They say, "If I were wrong, I wouldn't be winning." But winning isn't always a sign of truth. It's often just a sign of leverage. Nietzsche spoke about rising above the herd, about becoming more than what society expects, about breaking through fear and small thinking. But he didn't mean trampling others. He meant creating a life that reflects strength, creativity, and courage. The problem is that real power doesn't always look like conquest. Sometimes it looks like restraint. Sometimes it looks like letting go. But that version of power doesn't get much attention. It doesn't feel as exciting. It doesn't come with applause. So people chase the other kind, the visible kind, the kind that others can't ignore, the kind that says, look at what I've done, look at what I control. This hunger for power shows up in movements, governments, and even ideologies. A group says, we've been held back, it's our turn now. At first, they want fairness, but soon the goal shifts. It becomes about reversing roles, not balancing them, about winning, not healing, about revenge, not justice. That's the danger of the will to power without limits. It starts with a spark of growth, but it can turn into fire, and fire burns without asking who gets hurt. Sometimes people use the will to power to escape weakness. They feel small, so they reach for control. They feel afraid, so they try to dominate. But fear-based power can't last. It always needs more wins, more proof, more submission from others. It never settles, it never satisfies. Real strength doesn't need to prove itself. It doesn't need to win every argument. It doesn't need to hold people down to feel tall. But that kind of strength is quiet. It takes work. It doesn't offer the same rush. The will to power, at its best, means becoming who you are without fear. At its worst, it means forcing others to become what you want. That shift can happen without notice. One day, a person wants to grow. The next, they want to rule. You can hear it in how people speak. I built this, I earned this, I deserve this. At first, those words sound right, but sometimes they carry a deeper tone. A sense that others don't matter, that limits don't apply, that the world is just raw material for one person's will. And once someone believes that, they stop listening. They stop seeing others as people. They stop asking questions. They don't need permission, explanation, or approval. They just act. They say, this is who I am, but it's not always true. Sometimes it's just who they've become after chasing power for too long. Nietzsche wanted people to rise, not over others, but over fear, over weakness, over lies. The will to power was never about control, it was about creation. But creation takes discipline. Without it, power turns into impulse. An impulse, left unchecked, always looks for someone else to break. A train is speeding down the tracks. Ahead, 5 people are tied to the rails. You stand next to a lever. If you pull it, the train will switch to a side track where only 1 person is tied down. Do nothing, and 5 die. Pull the lever, and 1 dies to save 5. Most people say they would pull it. They say it's tragic, but it makes sense. That's basic utilitarian thinking. Choose the option that produces the greatest good for the greatest number. Now take it a step further. A surgeon has 5 patients in critical condition. Each needs a different organ. A healthy man walks into the hospital for a checkup. His organs match all 5. Under extreme utilitarianism, the surgeon kills him and saves the 5. More lives saved, greater good achieved. But something feels wrong. That's where the trouble starts. Utilitarianism sounds simple. Do whatever maximizes happiness and reduces suffering. But in its extreme form, it erases the individual. It treats people like numbers in a calculation. If saving more lives always justifies the action, then nothing is off limits, not even the sacrifice of the innocent. In war, this logic becomes dangerous. A general bombs a village to stop enemy forces. Civilians die. He says, this will save more lives in the long run. But how do you measure that? And who gets to decide which lives count more? Once the door opens to justifying harm for future good, it's hard to close it. The same logic shows up in policy. A government forces a group to leave their homes to build a dam. It powers millions of homes. The leaders say, a small group suffers so the majority benefits, but those people lose everything: their land, history, identity. Utilitarian math says the trade was worth it, but to the ones who paid the price, the equation feels cold. Extreme utilitarianism removes emotion from decisions. That's the point. It treats morality like a spreadsheet, but real life doesn't work that way. Not all suffering is equal. Not all good can be measured. And once you allow sacrifice for the greater good, you invite abuse. Think about justice. A prosecutor believes convicting one innocent person will make the public feel safe. They bend the rules, they hide evidence, they say this will prevent panic, it keeps faith in the system. But justice built on lies doesn't last, and the innocent person pays the cost. You can also see this in public health. During a crisis, leaders may decide that some people won't get treatment to save resources for others. They base it on age, risk, or value to society. They may not say it aloud, but the calculation is clear. Save the many, even if it means letting the few go. These decisions aren't easy. But extreme utilitarianism takes away the discomfort. It says, do the math. And once you start down that road, you lose the ability to say, this person matters, even if the numbers say otherwise. Imagine a man steals food to feed his starving family. The court says he broke the law and must be punished, but the punishment causes more harm than the theft. A strict utilitarian might say, if punishing him deters others from stealing, the harm is justified. But that ignores his story, his struggle, his humanity. Numbers alone can't hold all the weight. In science fiction, this logic shows up often. A hero sacrifices one person to save the planet. The audience nods along. But what if that person doesn't agree? What if they beg for their life? At what point does saving many become an excuse to crush the few? Real leaders face this in slow, steady ways. A company lays off hundreds to raise stock prices. They say it will help shareholders, increase value, create long-term growth. But those laid off don't feel part of the equation. They're a cost to cut. Not people, just data. In parenting, it can sneak in too. A mother makes a choice that benefits two of her children but hurts the third. She tells herself she did the right thing. But the child who suffers doesn't feel like part of a noble cause. They feel forgotten. When utilitarianism becomes extreme, it forgets that individuals carry stories. That pain can't be canceled out by someone else's gain. A happy person doesn't erase a suffering one. This kind of thinking can also justify lies. A leader says the truth will cause panic. If I lie, I can keep things calm. The lie protects more people, in theory. But it also erodes trust. It teaches people that truth is expendable, that trust is optional. Over time, that damage grows. In medicine, doctors face these choices often. Who gets the transplant? Who gets the ICU bed? Some systems use strict criteria. Others leave room for case-by-case judgment. Extreme utilitarianism removes that room. It says always pick the most gain. But that approach can leave vulnerable people behind. It can also lead to moral burnout. If every decision becomes a calculation, people lose their sense of care. They stop seeing others as individuals. They stop asking, what's right, and only ask, what works best overall. That mindset doesn't build compassion. It builds distance. Even in small ways, this shows up. A teacher gives more attention to high-achieving students, believing they'll contribute more to society. The struggling ones get ignored. The teacher says, I'm maximizing success. But the ignored students don't disappear. They carry the harm. They learn they don't matter. Extreme utilitarianism wants clear answers. It wants to say, this choice is better, full stop. But life doesn't always offer that. Sometimes the right choice hurts. Sometimes it means saying no to the numbers and yes to the person standing in front of you. People aren't numbers. They can't be moved around on a board without cost. Every action sends ripples. Every choice changes more than the outcome. It shapes how we see others, how we see ourselves, and what we believe a life is worth. When we start sacrificing people to serve a larger goal, we risk forgetting what the goal was in the first place. A man wakes up, connects his mind to a cloud server, and downloads a language in minutes. He no longer forgets anything. His body heals faster than it ever did. His limbs are stronger, his thoughts sharper. He is optimized. But when he looks in the mirror, something feels off. He can't tell if what he sees is still him or just the best version of what he used to be. That's the question at the heart of transhumanism. Transhumanism is the belief that we can and should improve the human body and mind through technology. It's not science fiction anymore. Brain implants, gene editing, artificial limbs, cognitive enhancers, these tools already exist in early forms. They start as medical fixes. A chip helps a paralyzed person move a cursor. A drug slows the effects of a disease. But once these tools move beyond repair and into enhancement, the line begins to blur. You give someone back their sight, and it's called treatment. You give them better than normal vision, and it becomes something else. The goal shifts from healing to upgrading. Transhumanism promises more than longevity. It promises control. Control over memory, emotion, thought, even death. That's a powerful idea. It taps into old fears and old dreams. Nobody wants to suffer. Nobody wants to forget. Nobody wants to die. But the deeper question is what we lose when we remove limits. When we edit away struggle. When we smooth out the parts that make us fragile. A student uses a brain enhancement to learn faster. He gets better grades, more job offers, others follow. Those who can't afford the upgrade fall behind. The market shifts. Employers start expecting enhanced minds. What started as a personal choice becomes a requirement. The ones who stay natural become outliers. The baseline moves. That's how technology changes not just individuals, but norms. This doesn't just affect performance, it affects identity. A woman uses a neural implant to reduce anxiety. It works. She feels calm, focused, steady, but she wonders if the new version of herself is still her. The sharp edges are gone. So are the old fears. But so is the fire that pushed her to write, to create, to speak. The implant took away the pain, but it also took away something she can't name. Transhumanism raises old questions in new forms. What does it mean to be human? Is it the body, the brain, the ability to feel pain and joy? Is it memory, struggle, mortality? If we change all of those things, if we can choose our limits, what's left? A soldier uses enhancements to stay awake longer, aim better, feel less fear. He performs well. But after the mission, he feels disconnected. He can't talk to his family. He can't cry. He doesn't sleep. The traits that made him effective now isolate him. He's not sick, he's not injured, he's optimized, and he's lost. Transhumanist thinkers often say evolution didn't finish the job, that nature built us for survival, not happiness, that the brain still carries flaws, bias, impulse, suffering, and they're right. But those flaws are often tied to things we value. The same brain that forgets also imagines. The same mind that fears also loves. If we remove one, can we keep the other? It's tempting to believe we can choose the best parts. Keep joy, lose grief, keep ambition, lose doubt. But the mind doesn't work like a menu. These things are connected. Pain shapes compassion, weakness builds trust, loss deepens meaning. When we try to erase the bad, we risk flattening the rest. In history, people have always tried to shape human nature. Religion, education, law all aim to improve behavior, but they work slowly. They rely on values, effort, time. Transhumanism skips the process. It changes the system itself. A pill for empathy, a switch for focus, a chip for willpower. No growth, just results. This shift also changes responsibility. If failure can be fixed with tech, is it still failure? If sadness is a chemical imbalance, not a response to life, do we still listen? Or do we just adjust the dosage? When struggle becomes a glitch, it stops being something to learn from. It becomes a flaw to remove. Some embrace this. They say suffering is overrated, that life can be better and we should make it better, that death is not noble, that struggle is not sacred. And they have a point. There's no glory in needless pain. But meaning doesn't always come from ease. It often comes from how we face what we can't control. A man lives for 200 years. He watches cities rise and fall. He buries friends, outlives trends, and adapts to every change. But by the end, he no longer remembers what it meant to fear death. He no longer feels urgency. He forgets what it felt like to run out of time. And without that, everything feels optional, even living. The promise of transhumanism is real. It offers tools that can heal, help, extend, but it also creates pressure. Pressure to improve, pressure to compete, pressure to leave the old version behind. The person you are now becomes a draft, something to edit, something to replace. Parents will face hard choices. Do they enhance their child's mind to keep up with others? Do they adjust temperament, memory, emotion? Do they give them the best chance? Or do they risk leaving them behind? Society will face harder ones. Who controls access? Who sets limits? What happens to the people who say no? What happens to those who say yes but change their mind? The tools will move faster than the laws. The upgrades will spread before the questions are settled. And the questions are not simple. What's the right balance between change and continuity? Between growth and loss? Between control and mystery? If every problem has a fix, what happens to resilience? If every flaw can be deleted, what happens to character? The danger of transhumanism is not that it changes what we are. Everything changes us: books, cities, tools, love. The danger is that it changes what we expect to be, that it tells us the self is never enough, that every part of us should be better, faster, smoother, smarter, that we should never stop optimizing. A boy asks his father, "What will I be when I grow up?" The father, enhanced and efficient, answers without emotion, "Whatever gives you the best output." The boy nods, but he doesn't smile. Something in that answer makes the future feel smaller, not bigger. That's what transhumanism risks when it forgets the human part. Not the biology, the being, the confusion, the contradiction, the fragile sense that we are enough even when we aren't perfect, especially when we aren't perfect. A man looks at a poor neighborhood and says, some people just can't compete. He believes the rich deserve their wealth because they worked harder or were born smarter. He believes the poor stay poor because they're weak. He doesn't see bad schools, broken systems, or stacked odds. He sees nature, survival of the fittest. That's the logic of social Darwinism. Social Darwinism takes the theory of evolution and twists it. Darwin wrote about how species change over time through natural selection. The strong traits help creatures survive and pass on their genes. But he never said this process should shape society. He didn't write policy. He didn't draw lines between people. That came later. People took his ideas and applied them to economics, class, and race. They said, if nature rewards the strong, we should too. They claimed success in life proves someone's fitness. If someone fails, it must be because they weren't fit to begin with. That logic strips away context. It treats inequality as nature's law instead of something people create. In the late 1800s, industrialists used this thinking to defend harsh labor conditions. Factory owners said workers who complained were weak. They called unions a threat to progress. They claimed that letting people suffer would make society stronger. Help was seen as interference. Pity was weakness. The poor weren't just unfortunate, they were unfit. Politicians picked it up. They used it to justify imperialism. They said some nations were more advanced and had a right, even a duty, to conquer others. They called it progress. They said they were bringing civilization. But under that language was a belief that some people mattered more than others, that some were born to rule and others to obey. In the early 20th century, social Darwinism fueled eugenics. Lawmakers passed sterilization laws. Doctors labeled people as feeble-minded and took away their ability to have children. They said they were protecting the gene pool, that they were helping the human race. But what they were really doing was drawing a line between who deserves to exist and who doesn't. Intelligence, disability, race, poverty, these became reasons to control reproduction. The victims had no say. In Nazi Germany, this logic reached its most violent form. The state used eugenics to build a racial hierarchy. Jews, Roma, disabled people, and others were labeled as inferior. They were removed, sterilized, murdered. The Nazis claimed they were cleansing the population. They said it was science, but it wasn't science. It was ideology. A story told with charts and uniforms to mask hatred. Social Darwinism pretends to be neutral. It uses biology to sound objective. But it's not about facts, it's about power. It gives the strong a story to explain why they should stay on top. It gives them permission to ignore suffering or to cause it. You can still hear echoes of it today. A politician cuts welfare and says it teaches responsibility. A CEO justifies layoffs by calling them evolution. A school says low test scores are proof of low potential. The logic creeps in through the back door. The words change, but the message stays the same. If you fall behind, it's your fault. But evolution doesn't work this way. It's not about wealth or status. It's not a ladder. It doesn't reward good or punish bad. It responds to environment. It works slowly. It doesn't create a best species. It creates what survives in a given time and place. What looks strong today may not last tomorrow. Evolution isn't a moral system. It's not about fairness or justice. Social Darwinism erases cooperation. In nature, survival often depends on working together. Ants, wolves, primates, many species rely on group behavior. Humans are no different. We build families, cities, systems. We help the sick, the old, the young. That's not weakness, that's survival. A society that cuts off the weak also cuts off part of itself. It also ignores luck. People aren't born into equal conditions. Some grow up with food, shelter, education, and safety. Others don't. Some face racism, poverty, trauma. Others get a head start. Social Darwinism says that those differences don't matter, that outcomes reflect inner worth. But outcomes often reflect chance. A student born into wealth gets tutors, support, time to study. Another student works 2 jobs to help pay rent. They take the same test. One gets a top score, the other fails. Social Darwinism says one is smart and the other isn't. But it doesn't see what happened before the test. It also turns suffering into a virtue for the strong. A billionaire gives a speech about how hard he worked. He says, "I made it. Why can't you?" But he leaves out the safety net, the connections, the second chances. He turns his path into a rule. He says anyone who falls behind deserves it. That story protects him. It makes success feel earned and failure feel deserved. Social Darwinism shuts down empathy. If you believe people suffer because they're unfit, you don't have to help. You can say, it's just nature. You can look away. You can tell yourself it's for the best. But society isn't nature. It's built. It reflects choices about laws, schools, housing, health, justice. When people suffer, it often means the system failed, not the person. And when people succeed, it often means they had help, not just strength. You can believe in effort without blaming the unlucky. You can value success without calling poverty a flaw. You can admire talent without saying others are disposable. Social Darwinism strips away that balance. It makes strength the only value. It tells the strong they're right and the weak they're wrong. It turns survival into morality. But survival doesn't mean better. It just means present. A society that follows this path stops asking questions. It stops looking at root causes. It stops seeing people as people. It sees winners and losers, fit and unfit, us and them. That's the real danger. Not just bad science, but bad ethics dressed up as truth. And once people believe it's natural, they stop believing it can change. A man draws a map of a city that doesn't exist. Every street has a purpose. Every building serves a function. There's no poverty, no crime, no waste. People live in harmony. Rules are clear, roles are fixed. He calls it a vision of the future. He believes it could be real if only people would listen. That's how utopianism begins. Utopianism is the belief that a perfect society can be created. Not just a better world, but an ideal one. Flawless, orderly, just. It comes from a place of hope. People look around, see pain and injustice, and imagine something better. That's not the problem. The danger comes when the dream becomes rigid, when it turns into a plan with no room for error. When people believe that achieving perfection justifies anything. The word utopia means no place. It was coined by Thomas More in the 1500s. His book described an imaginary island with no private property, no war, no greed. Everyone worked. Everyone shared. Everyone believed the same things. On the surface, it looked peaceful, but there was a cost. Strict rules, surveillance, punishment for anyone who stood out. The harmony depended on control. That pattern shows up again and again. A group rises to power with a promise, a better world. They say, we will end corruption, we will fix the system, we will make things fair. People cheer, they want change, but then the plan starts, the rules tighten, dissent becomes dangerous. The leaders say, we're too close to stop now, sacrifices must be made. In the Soviet Union, the goal was equality, a classless society, no exploitation, no poverty. But the means to get there involved forced labor, mass surveillance, famine, and purges. People were jailed for speaking, for writing, for thinking the wrong way. The leaders said it was necessary, that the revolution had to be protected, that the ends would justify the means. In China's Cultural Revolution, the aim was to erase old ways of thinking, to make everyone equal. The government encouraged children to report their parents, books were burned, teachers were attacked, intellectuals were sent to the countryside to be re-educated. The movement spoke the language of progress. But underneath was fear and control. In Cambodia, the Khmer Rouge emptied cities. They killed artists, teachers, anyone who wore glasses. They wanted to restart society from year zero. They believed that wiping the slate clean would bring peace. Instead, it brought genocide. These aren't just accidents of history. They follow a pattern. Utopian movements often begin with moral certainty, the belief that one system, one truth, one plan can fix everything. Once that belief hardens, there's no room for disagreement. Anyone who questions the vision becomes a threat. Anyone who resists becomes an enemy of progress. Even smaller versions follow the same logic. A cult promises spiritual purity. It separates members from their families. It controls what they wear, eat, say. The leader says, we're building something perfect. The outside world is broken. Members accept more and more restrictions. They tell themselves it's worth it, that suffering now will bring peace later. You see this in experimental communities too. Groups that try to live by strict ideals, total equality, shared property, one faith. At first, there's excitement, then come the rules. Who gets what? Who decides? What happens when someone breaks the code? Disputes arise, people leave or are forced out. The dream depends on sameness, on order. on keeping everyone in line. The problem with utopianism isn't the desire for a better world. It's the belief that perfection is possible and that only one path leads there. That belief kills flexibility. It makes compromise look like betrayal. It turns disagreement into danger. Real societies are messy. People want different things. They believe different things. They make mistakes. They change their minds. Utopian plans often fail because they can't handle that. They try to simplify what can't be simplified. A government promises to end crime. They pass strict laws. They increase police power. They set up surveillance. Soon, petty theft carries harsh sentences. Speech becomes suspicious. Fear spreads. The state says, "We're making you safe." But safety at that cost isn't peace. It's control dressed up as order. Utopianism can also erase the past. A movement says, we must leave history behind. The old ways are rotten. So they tear down institutions, burn books, ban traditions. But history is not just mistakes. It's also memory, learning, continuity. Without it, people become unmoored. They lose more than what the movement meant to destroy. Technology brings a new form of utopianism. Some believe we can program our way to a perfect world, that data and algorithms can solve human flaws. But people aren't machines. You can't code away greed or fear or longing. When tech becomes a tool for social control, it follows the same old path: optimized behavior, scored citizens, predictive policing, systems that look clean but hide real harm. Even in personal life, you can see traces of this mindset. People try to craft perfect routines, perfect diets, perfect families. They chase optimization. They treat every flaw as failure. They become rigid, obsessed with order, but life resists that kind of control. The harder they push, the more anxious they become. Utopianism fails because it forgets what people are. It treats them like puzzle pieces, like parts of a plan. It assumes that if the structure is right, people will fall into place. But people don't work that way. They resist, they question, they deviate. That's not a flaw. That's the point. A society that allows for freedom, debate, error, that accepts tension without rushing to fix it, won't be perfect. But it can breathe. It can grow. A utopia can't do that. It must be static, frozen in place. It must defend its blueprint, no matter what. When a vision becomes more important than the people in it, oppression follows. Not all at once. It starts with rules, then punishment, then fear. The dream becomes a weapon, and those who once hoped for peace end up guarding a prison. A child stands in front of a classroom. He's asked to recite a pledge, not to his family, not to his values, but to the state. The teacher watches, so do his classmates. He stumbles over a line and lowers his voice. Later, he tells his mother. She looks nervous and tells him not to bring it up again. That's how totalitarian collectivism begins, not with tanks, but with silence. Totalitarian collectivism is a system where individual freedom is stripped away for the claimed benefit of the collective. The group becomes everything. The person becomes nothing. The state tells you who you are, what you can say, and what you must believe. You don't own your thoughts, you borrow them from the ruling party. And if you try to take them back, you pay a price. It starts with a good-sounding goal: unity, safety, equality, stability. A leader says, we must stand together. A party says, the individual is selfish, the group must come first. And people nod. They're tired of chaos, tired of disorder, tired of being alone. The promise of collective strength gives them comfort, but that comfort comes with control. You see this in history. In Stalin's Soviet Union, the state controlled speech, food, travel, religion. Children turned in parents, workers turned in neighbors. The party said, you are not a person, you are a comrade, and comrades do not question the collective. To speak against the system wasn't just a crime, it was betrayal, not just of a government, but of the people. The state blurred the line between dissent and treason. Once that line disappeared, punishment could happen for anything. In Mao's China, collectivism reached into every part of life. People wore the same clothes, read the same book, repeated the same slogans. The Cultural Revolution wasn't just a policy shift. It was an attempt to erase the self. Names were changed, histories were rewritten, identity was dissolved. The only approved version of you was the one that matched the movement. The logic always sounds familiar. Sacrifice yourself for the greater good. If you object, you must be selfish. If you think differently, you must be dangerous. Totalitarian collectivism does not need to explain itself. It only needs to label the outsider. Once labeled, anything can be done to you in the name of safety, justice, or unity. This doesn't just happen in authoritarian regimes. The pressure to conform can creep in anywhere, in workplaces, in communities, in political movements. People start using the same words, sharing the same posts, signaling the same views. At first, it looks like solidarity. Then, it becomes pressure. People who speak carefully, people who stop asking questions, people who stay quiet, not because they agree, but because they're afraid to stand out. A society doesn't erase freedom all at once. It does it in small steps. It starts by making speech dangerous. Then it targets ideas. Then it punishes the people who hold them. Not because they've harmed anyone, but because they're inconvenient, because they think differently. In totalitarian collectivism, the group is sacred, but not any group you choose. Not your family, your religion, or your culture. Only the approved collective, the one shaped by the state. Loyalty to anything else becomes suspect. Religion becomes a threat. Why? Because it gives you a code outside the system, a higher power, a different source of truth. So the state shuts it down or absorbs it. Private life becomes political. Even love gets filtered through the lens of loyalty. Who you marry, how you raise children, how you spend your time, all are subject to scrutiny. If you live outside the collective, you're seen as a problem. Not because of what you've done, but because of who you are. Propaganda plays a key role. It doesn't just tell you what's true, it tells you what's allowed. The party speaks in absolutes. It creates slogans, songs, posters. It floods public space with one story. Then it floods your mind. After a while, people repeat the message, not because they believe it, but because they no longer remember how not to. Children are taught early. They sing the songs, they recite the pledges. They draw the leader's face in school. Not out of love, but out of habit, out of fear. A child doesn't understand tyranny. They understand reward and punishment. They learn quickly what earns praise and what brings shame. That learning becomes hard to undo. The economy shifts too. The state often controls production, labor, distribution. Individual success becomes suspicious. Wealth, talent, and creativity must serve the group. If they don't, they're torn down. The goal is not to raise the weak, but to flatten the strong. To make everyone the same, not through fairness, but through force. Art suffers, thought suffers, language shrinks. In a totalitarian collective, complexity is dangerous. Nuance invites doubt. Doubt invites debate. So the language gets smaller, emotions get simplified, concepts are boiled down to for us or against us, and people learn not to say too much, not to ask, not to think. Even when the system collapses, the habits remain. People carry them for years. The silence, the fear, the reflex to look over your shoulder, to censor yourself, to hide what matters. That doesn't fade quickly. Some argue that collectivism is necessary, that unity brings strength, that shared goals create peace. That's partly true. No society survives without some form of cohesion. But there's a difference between working together and being absorbed, between shared purpose and forced loyalty, between helping others and erasing yourself. Real community comes from consent, from choice, from trust. Totalitarian collectivism doesn't trust the individual. It sees them as a threat. It needs control to survive. And it will use every tool to get it: law, media, school, fear. It also sells a lie, that disagreement is division, that freedom creates chaos, that a single voice is always stronger than many. But the strongest societies aren't the ones with perfect agreement. They're the ones that survive disagreement, that tolerate the hard parts of freedom, that give people room to speak, to fail, to be wrong. The problem with totalitarian collectivism isn't that it asks people to care for one another. It's that it demands obedience in the name of care. It claims to protect the group while destroying the people who make it up. It crushes the self and calls it sacrifice. It builds prisons and calls them harmony. You can tell it's taking hold when people start to whisper, when public speech becomes careful, when private belief becomes dangerous, when slogans replace thought, when silence replaces dissent, and when the most loyal person is the one who says nothing at all. A man sits on a bench at sunrise. The sky turns orange. Birds move across the trees. He watches quietly, but nothing stirs in him. He doesn't feel awe or wonder. He feels nothing at all. He tells himself, it doesn't matter. Nothing does. That's the voice of nihilism. Nihilism is the belief that life has no inherent meaning, purpose, or value. Not because things are bad, but because they're empty. It says there's no deeper truth behind what we do. No grand story, no final goal. Morality, art, love, even suffering, none of it holds weight beyond what we assign to it. And once you believe that, the world can feel hollow. People don't usually wake up nihilist. It creeps in. A person grows up with rules, what's good, what's bad, what matters. They follow those rules or they break them, but they still think they mean something. Then something shatters. Maybe they lose someone. Maybe they fail at something that mattered. Maybe they study too much philosophy. They start to see how arbitrary those rules can be, how the world keeps going no matter what they do. And slowly, the ground under their feet feels less solid. It can start as a question. What's the point? A student works hard for years, earns the degree, gets the job, and still feels empty. They thought reaching that point would bring peace. It doesn't. So they question the system. Then they question themselves. They say, if this doesn't mean anything, maybe nothing does. Nihilism doesn't offer a solution. It strips away meaning and leaves you to deal with what's left. For some, that leads to despair. They stop caring. They drift. They lose the desire to build anything because nothing feels worth building. Even pleasure fades. The highs lose their edge. The lows start to stretch out. Time passes, but nothing feels anchored. In extreme cases, nihilism leads to moral apathy. A person might say, if nothing matters, then why be kind? Why tell the truth? They don't feel guilt, they don't feel duty, they don't feel anything except the absence of meaning. That's where the danger lies. Without some sense of value, people can grow cold. Not because they're cruel, but because they no longer see a reason not to be. History shows how this can spread. In times of crisis, when old systems collapse and beliefs fall apart, nihilism often rises. After war, after economic failure, after political collapse, people start to doubt the structures that gave their lives shape. They stop believing in institutions. In some cases, they stop believing in anything. That vacuum can open the door to anything that offers certainty, even if it's violent or extreme. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote about this. He said the old gods were dying, not just religious ones, but moral systems too. He warned that once people stopped believing in meaning, something else would rush in to fill the space. Sometimes it's power, sometimes it's chaos. Sometimes it's silence. You can see this in small ways. A person loses faith in love after too many betrayals. They say relationships are just illusions. They stop trying. They treat people as distractions, not partners. Or someone grows tired of politics. They say all sides lie. It's all fake. So they stop voting, stop reading, stop caring. The belief that nothing matters becomes a reason to stop living fully. But nihilism doesn't always feel like pain. Sometimes it feels like distance. A man hears good news and shrugs. He hears bad news and shrugs again. He doesn't feel pulled in any direction. He moves through life like a shadow. He avoids risk. He avoids hope. Not because he's afraid, but because he doesn't believe anything can truly change. This mindset can show up in art and culture. Movies, music, and writing that treat life as a joke or a trap. Characters who act without reason. Stories with no resolution. The message isn't always loud, but it's there. Meaning is fake, and the best you can do is laugh or look away. People try to fight nihilism with distractions. Work, parties, travel, endless scrolling. But the quiet question stays. What is all this for? If there's no answer, the noise eventually fades, and the emptiness returns. Some respond by creating their own meaning. They say, even if the universe is silent, I'll choose what matters to me. But that takes effort. It takes belief. And nihilism makes belief feel impossible. It says, you're pretending. And that voice is hard to shut out. In some cases, nihilism leads to cruelty. If you believe nothing has value, then people become objects, things to use or discard. Morality becomes a story you no longer believe. That doesn't mean every nihilist is violent, but it means the framework that holds most people back is gone. A soldier in a ruined city sees families starving. He used to feel something. Now he just stares. He lights a cigarette and moves on. That's nihilism in motion. Not rage, not sadness, just absence. Even kindness can become empty under nihilism. A man donates to charity, but only out of habit. A woman helps a stranger, but feels nothing. They don't believe in good or bad. They just go through motions. It's not wrong, but it's not alive either. This isn't always visible. A person can seem normal, go to work, make jokes, show up, But inside, they've stopped reaching. They've stopped asking why. They've stopped hoping. They've accepted a version of the world where nothing means anything, and they've decided to coast through it. The risk isn't just depression, it's disconnection from others, from purpose, from self. Once the thread of meaning is cut, it's hard to tie it back. Even if someone wants to, they may not remember how. Not all philosophy leads here. Not all doubt is dangerous. Questioning meaning is part of being human. But when the questions pile up without answers and the answers lose weight, nihilism steps in. It offers nothing, no path, no goal, just the idea that life is a stage with no script and no audience. Some people learn to live in that space. They accept the void. They say, there's no meaning, and that's okay. But many don't. Many get lost. And once you stop believing anything matters, it's hard to believe in anything at all. A student raises her hand in class and says, there's no such thing as truth. Everyone just has their own perspective. The teacher nods. The other students nod. No one argues. No one asks what that means. That's what radical postmodernism sounds like. Not a search for truth, but a denial that truth exists at all. Postmodernism didn't start that way. It began as a response to grand narratives, stories told by religion, science, or ideology that claimed to explain everything. It questioned certainty. It asked, whose truth? Whose history? It pushed back against the idea that one version of reality must rule all others. In that way, it served a purpose. It gave voice to people left out of the official story. But taken to an extreme, postmodernism doesn't just question truth. It erases it. It says that all ideas are equal, that facts are just opinions wearing a costume, that there's no ground to stand on, just floating viewpoints. In that world, nothing can be proven and nothing can be judged. If nothing is true, then lies are just alternative narratives. If nothing is right, then cruelty is just a different form of order. If no version of history holds weight, then revision becomes easy. Whoever speaks the loudest controls the story. That's the vacuum left behind when truth is removed and power rushes to fill it. A government erases records of a massacre. People protest. Officials say, that's just your interpretation. They don't deny the deaths, they deny the meaning. They deny the authority of anyone who remembers. The facts don't disappear, but they no longer matter. The state rewrites the past, not by burning books, but by flooding the public with doubt. That's the trick of radical postmodernism. It doesn't need to prove anything false. It just needs to make you unsure. It says, who can really say? And in that fog, strong voices rise. They offer certainty, even if it's wrong. People grab onto it, not because it's true, but because it's solid. A politician lies on camera. The video spreads. Supporters say, that clip's out of context, or that's just your framing, or everyone lies. The debate shifts from what happened to how it was presented. The lie becomes background noise. The truth drowns in spin. In this world, language becomes a tool of control. Words don't point to reality. They shape it. A regime changes the word torture to enhanced interrogation. The act stays the same. The meaning changes. And once meaning is up for grabs, accountability disappears. This mindset also changes how people argue. In a debate, someone says, that's just your opinion. It doesn't matter if you have facts, logic, or history. What matters is perspective. Everything becomes subjective. No common ground, no shared frame, just competing voices shouting past one another. Radical postmodernism pretends to empower. It says everyone's view counts. But when all views are equal, the loudest ones dominate. The most confident, the most aggressive, the most well-funded. Not because they're right, but because they know how to perform authority. Even science is treated with suspicion. A researcher presents data on climate change. Someone responds, that's one narrative. Another expert presents contradictory findings funded by an oil company. Both are treated as equal in public debate. The fact that one is built on peer review and the other on profit doesn't matter. In a post-truth world, evidence has no weight. In education, students may be taught that objectivity is impossible, that all knowledge is socially constructed, that math, grammar, and logic reflect cultural bias. These ideas start with a point. Culture does shape understanding, but stretched too far, they collapse the idea of truth itself. They leave students unsure whether any fact can be trusted. They replace learning with skepticism. Art and media shift too. A movie shows clear violence. A critic says it's satire. Another says it's propaganda. Another calls it meaningless. No reading is wrong, so no reading is right. The work floats in a cloud of interpretations, each disconnected from responsibility. A director defends a scene by saying, "It means whatever you think it means." If everything means everything, then nothing means anything. This doesn't stop at theory. In practice, radical postmodernism creates instability. If you can't tell what's real, you can't respond. If you can't name harm, you can't stop it. If you can't trust language, you can't communicate. The result is paralysis. In court, a witness gives testimony. The defense says that's just her truth. The jury wavers. If everyone has their own truth, then truth becomes a feeling, a mood, a lens. Justice turns into a battle of impressions. Power loves this. It doesn't need truth. It needs confusion. It needs people who are too unsure to resist. It uses irony, sarcasm, and misdirection. It floods the world with noise. Then it says, "Trust us. We'll make it simple." Radical postmodernism also weakens movements that seek justice. When activists say this is wrong, critics respond, "That's your view." When people call out injustice, others say that depends on the frame. The fight for rights gets bogged down in language games. The clarity of right and wrong becomes suspect. This can break people down. A survivor tells their story. Listeners say, "Memory is unreliable." A reporter shows evidence of abuse. Readers say, "Media is biased." Over time, the truth gets chipped away, not by proof, but by exhaustion. People give up trying to know. They give up trying to act. What begins as critique becomes surrender. Postmodernism asks the right questions: who speaks, who decides, who benefits? But in its radical form, it stops there. It offers no answer, only doubt. No firm ground, only flux. And where there is no truth, there is no limit. Power can say anything, do anything, rewrite anything, because nothing can be held against it. People may laugh off truth as outdated. They may treat meaning as a joke, but deep down, they still seek something firm. Some fact, some trust, some shared place to stand. Without it, society becomes a crowd of strangers speaking different languages, each convinced the others are making it up. Radical postmodernism doesn't destroy truth with force. It erodes it with questions, slowly, patiently, until people stop asking, and then someone steps in, not with truth, but with command. Not with clarity, but with control. They don't argue, they declare, and no one pushes back because no one believes there's anything solid to push from. A government sets out to build the perfect citizen, not through persuasion, but through structure. They design schools that teach one way of thinking. They control media, rewrite textbooks, adjust language, monitor behavior. They believe that if you change the environment, you can change the person. Not just on the outside, but deep down. That's cultural engineering. Cultural engineering is the belief that human nature is plastic, that people are blank slates, and that systems alone can reshape thought, emotion, and identity. It assumes that biology doesn't matter, and that the individual is just a product of their surroundings. That assumption sounds modern, it sounds rational, but when taken too far, it creates real harm, because it ignores limits, and it ignores what makes people different. You see this belief in attempts to erase class, religion, language, or gender in the name of unity. The idea is simple. Remove the cause of division and everyone will fall into place. But people don't fall into place. They resist. They remember. They hide what they aren't allowed to express. And that resistance, over time, turns into fear, shame, or quiet rage. In Mao's China, the government tried to engineer a new culture. They banned traditional dress, renamed streets, erased customs, and punished religious expression. They called it progress, but it wasn't organic, it was enforced. The goal wasn't to allow culture to grow, it was to overwrite it. That's not evolution, that's replacement. The plan failed. People conformed on the outside, but kept old habits inside. And when the pressure eased, the old ways returned, because they were never really gone. The Soviet Union had a similar dream. The new Soviet man was supposed to be selfless, rational, collective-minded, a person shaped by ideology, not by family, faith, or history. The state ran schools, youth programs, art, and labor camps to build that kind of person. But people didn't become selfless. They became cautious. They learned to say one thing in public and another in private. The system didn't erase the individual, it just pushed them underground. Cultural engineering assumes people can be designed like machines, that if you input the right data, the right routine, the right conditions, you'll get the right output. But people aren't machines. They're inconsistent. They carry memory, instinct, emotion. They're shaped by experience, but also by genes, chemistry, and temperament. You can influence behavior, you can nudge, but you can't write over the self. Some of the worst ideas in history came from this belief that culture can fix what biology gets wrong, that people can be purified through re-education or cleansed through control. In Cambodia, the Khmer Rouge emptied cities and sent people to work camps. They banned money, shut down schools, and tried to wipe out class differences. They believed they could start society from zero. Instead, they caused mass death, trauma, and chaos. This kind of thinking doesn't only happen in authoritarian states. It shows up in softer ways. A school tries to make all students learn the same way. It rewards quiet obedience and punishes outliers. A workplace promotes one kind of personality: loud, outgoing, always smiling. Introverts struggle. Neurodivergent people get labeled difficult. The system was designed with one image of success, and anyone who doesn't match it falls through the cracks. Even parenting can lean this way. A parent believes that with the right schedule, discipline, and praise, they can shape their child into anything. They treat every behavior as a reflection of technique. When the child struggles, the parent blames themselves, or the child. But kids aren't just products of input. They come with their own wiring. Some are anxious, some are strong-willed. Some learn by touch, others by sound. You can guide, but you can't mold. The same goes for therapy, education, religion. These systems offer tools, but not guarantees. They support change, but they don't erase difference. A person can learn to cope, they can grow, but they may never think or feel like the ideal model. That doesn't mean they failed, it means they're human. Cultural engineering often hides behind good goals: equality, unity, progress. But when it treats difference as defect, it becomes coercive. It punishes what it doesn't understand. It tries to fix what isn't broken. In modern settings, the same mindset shows up in algorithmic nudging. Companies collect data and adjust what people see. They test colors, words, layouts to shape behavior. They don't call it engineering, but it is. They believe they can make you click, watch, buy, vote, and often they can. But they can't explain why one person resists, why another doesn't follow the pattern. That's the limit, and that's where respect for the individual begins. Cultural engineering treats that limit as a problem to solve. It assumes that given enough control, enough planning, enough force, you can smooth out the wrinkles. But people aren't meant to be smooth. They carry contradiction. They want freedom, even when they don't know what to do with it. This doesn't mean culture is fixed. Culture evolves, ideas change, people learn. But change that sticks tends to happen slowly. It grows from within, not from pressure. When systems try to rush it, when they force belief, punish difference, or reward conformity, they don't shape culture. They suppress it. You can see this in media too. Campaigns that try to shift behavior by pushing one message, one tone, one image. They assume people will adapt. Some do, but others tune out, not because they're hostile to change, but because they sense they're being shaped. And shaping, when it ignores the self, invites backlash. The belief behind cultural engineering is simple. We can make people better. But better by whose standard? Better according to what metric? And who decides? Those questions often go unasked. The system defines good, it builds a mold, and then it forces people to fit. But people don't fit. Not neatly, not fully. And when you design a system that ignores that truth, you don't get better people. You get quiet people, anxious people, angry people, or people who pretend. They learn to smile, follow, and repeat. But when the pressure lifts, they leave, or they speak, or they break. Human nature isn't blank. It's shaped by both nature and nurture, biology and culture, memory and instinct. Trying to erase one half of the equation doesn't elevate people, it flattens them. The dream of building better systems is worth having. But systems work best when they adapt to people, not when they try to replace them. When they support growth, not uniformity. When they leave space for difference, not just permission. Cultural engineering forgets that. It assumes that if the input is strong enough, the human will disappear. But the human doesn't disappear. It waits. And when it returns, it remembers who tried to erase it. A man walks down a hallway lined with cameras. No one speaks to him. No one stops him. No one even watches the screens. But he straightens his back, checks his shirt, lowers his voice on the phone. He acts as if he's being watched. because maybe he is, maybe he isn't. That uncertainty shapes him. That's Panopticism. Michel Foucault took the idea from Jeremy Bentham's Panopticon, a circular prison with a watchtower at the center. From that tower, one guard could watch many prisoners. The key wasn't actual surveillance. It was the possibility of being seen at any moment. The prisoner never knew if someone was watching, so they behaved as if someone always was. Foucault said modern power works the same way, not through violence, but through visibility. Not through punishment, but through observation. The more people feel seen, the more they police themselves. They adjust before anyone else has to step in. The system doesn't force them. It teaches them to force themselves. You see this in schools. A student sits in class. The teacher doesn't yell, doesn't punish, doesn't even speak. But the room is arranged so every move feels visible. The student wants to slouch, check their phone, or stare out the window, but they don't. Not because anyone stopped them, because they've learned to stop themselves. In workplaces, employees monitor their tone in emails, their posture in meetings, their words in casual talk. Even breaks are managed. Cameras watch entrances. Software tracks logins. People change their behavior to fit the system, not because they're told to, but because they've internalized the gaze. They've absorbed the watcher. Panopticism doesn't need a guard. It needs a structure. A layout that makes people visible. A rhythm that keeps them on edge. A routine that makes self-surveillance feel normal. It doesn't rely on force. It relies on design. It's in the layout of open offices, the architecture of cities, the formatting of resumes, the shape of digital platforms. It's in policies that say, we're watching, even when no one looks. Social media extends the effect. People post photos, opinions, jokes. Then they pause, they edit, they delete. Not because the state censors them, but because someone might disapprove. A friend, a stranger, a future employer, a faceless public that could turn judgment into consequence. Over time, that pause becomes habit. A thought arises. You check yourself. You ask, how will this be seen? You reshape the thought. You silence it. You censor before anyone else has to. This isn't just fear, it's training. From a young age, people are taught that being seen matters, that image is behavior, that how you appear is who you are. So you manage yourself, not once, but all the time. The discipline becomes part of you. Foucault called this internalization of control disciplinary power. Unlike brute power, it doesn't shout, it whispers, it rewards compliance. It creates subjects who behave not out of obedience, but out of habit. They believe they're choosing, but their choices have already been shaped. A person applies for a job. They clean up their online presence. They change their profile picture. They hide old posts. No one told them to, but they know. They feel the pressure of invisible eyes. They anticipate judgment. They act accordingly. This extends to how people speak, what jokes they make, what opinions they share, what hobbies they admit to. You don't need censorship when people learn to self-edit. You don't need a rulebook when fear does the work. In some cases, the watcher is real. A company records keystrokes. A school uses facial recognition. A government scans social media. But even when it isn't real, the possibility of being watched is enough. The system doesn't require constant enforcement. It only requires belief. Panopticism spreads in quiet ways. A form, a policy, a camera, a code of conduct tells people you're part of something bigger and you're visible. That message gets under the skin. It can even feel like safety. Cameras mean crime prevention. Tracking means accountability. Filters mean quality. But beneath that is control. Not just of behavior, but of identity. Think about uniforms. Not just clothes, but tones, scripts, manners. A call center agent follows a script. A cashier repeats a line. A doctor documents in a specific format. These aren't always bad, but over time, they flatten people. They train them not to speak freely, but to sound correct. In digital spaces, this intensifies. Platforms track clicks, scrolls, likes. Algorithms reward certain behaviors. People adapt. They change how they write, post, react. Not to express themselves, but to fit the mold, to get engagement, to avoid shadow bans or backlash. This creates a feedback loop. Behavior shapes the system shapes behavior. And at some point, no one needs to ask, what do you think? They already know what you'll say. You've trained yourself to match the pattern. Foucault said the panopticon worked not by watching everyone, but by creating a state where people watch themselves. You carry the tower inside you. You scan your own actions. You punish your own slips. Not with shame, not with guilt, just with silence, with withdrawal, with disappearance. The goal of Panopticism isn't to catch you, it's to make sure there's nothing to catch, that you stay in line before you ever step out of it, that you stay visible, manageable, predictable. This changes what it means to be free. If you can say anything but don't, are you free? If you can act how you want but always adjust, are you free? Panopticism doesn't lock you in a cell. It builds the cell in your head. It also affects trust. People learn to read the room before they speak. They second-guess jokes, stories, questions. They scan faces. They look for signals, not out of kindness, but out of fear. What if this is the moment someone sees them the wrong way? What if this is the moment they cross a line they didn't know existed? In time, people stop risking those moments. They shrink. They smile more. They speak less, not because they're shy, but because they've learned that less risk means less pain. This isn't always visible. The office looks calm, the streets look safe, the posts look polished. But under that surface is constant calculation. People aren't relaxed, they're rehearsed, they're monitored, by others, by systems, and by themselves. Panopticism doesn't need a prison. It doesn't need violence. It just needs structure. Architecture, policy, tech, culture. Tools that make people feel watched. And once that feeling takes hold, control runs on its own. A man stands at attention, hands behind his back, eyes forward. The officer speaks, and he nods without question. The order is harsh, even cruel, but he doesn't flinch. He doesn't ask why. He says, "I'm just following orders." He believes in order, in hierarchy, in doing what he's told. Not because he's afraid, because it feels right. That's the foundation of authoritarian personality theory. After World War II, researchers wanted to understand how ordinary people could support violent regimes, how citizens could join in persecution or stand by silently. Psychologists Theodor Adorno and his team developed the theory of the authoritarian personality. They believed certain people were more likely to submit to authority, especially rigid, hierarchical, or punitive authority. Not out of fear, but out of belief. For them, obedience is not a compromise, it's a virtue. This personality type favors structure. It prefers order over ambiguity. It responds well to rules and roles. It sees the world in black and white, us and them, right and wrong, strong and weak. It often rejects complexity. It avoids doubt. In uncertainty, it turns to strength. You see this in how some people respond to power. A leader speaks with confidence. He doesn't hedge, doesn't explain, doesn't ask. He commands. Some people pull away, others lean in. They feel safe in his certainty. They don't question the claim, only whether others will follow fast enough. The authoritarian personality isn't just submissive, it's also aggressive toward outsiders, rule breakers, and anyone who challenges the structure. That aggression isn't random, it's directed. It flows down the hierarchy, not up. The same person who obeys authority may lash out at the vulnerable. They may bully the weak and praise the strong. They don't see that as contradiction. They see it as loyalty. A child raised in a rigid home learns early. Obey the rules, respect authority, don't ask too many questions. They get punished for stepping out of line and rewarded for compliance. Over time, those lessons sink deep. As adults, they may gravitate towards strict systems, religious, political, or social. Systems where everything has a place and everyone knows their role. This isn't always obvious. It doesn't require uniforms or marching. It can show up in a quiet love of tradition, a discomfort with change, a strong reaction to dissent. A person may say, "That's just how things are." They don't see this as a limitation, they see it as stability. In workplaces, authoritarian personalities often value hierarchy. They trust the manager over the coworker. They follow the policy even when it doesn't make sense. They dislike complaints and tend to view whistleblowers as troublemakers. If someone bends a rule to help a client, they see it as a threat, not a kindness. In politics, these patterns are clearer. Authoritarian-leaning individuals often support strong leaders who present themselves as tough, decisive, and protective. They respond well to speeches that emphasize law and order, national pride, and moral clarity. They're more likely to fear outsiders, immigrants, minorities, or dissenting voices. Not necessarily out of personal hatred, but because they see outsiders as potential threats to the structure they trust. This isn't about intelligence, it's about worldview. An authoritarian personality doesn't look for evidence first. It looks for reassurance. It wants to know someone's in charge, that someone is watching, that rules are being followed. When things feel uncertain, this mindset tightens. It hardens. It becomes more rigid, not less. During times of social unrest or crisis, authoritarian tendencies grow. People want order. They want someone to restore normalcy. They may give up rights willingly. They may look the other way when force is used, not because they love cruelty, but because they fear chaos more. The authoritarian mindset doesn't stop with obedience. It also polices others. A person hears someone question a rule. They feel anxious. They may report it. They may correct the behavior. They believe the group's health depends on unity, and unity depends on control. They see dissent not as dialogue, but as danger. This kind of thinking can be exploited. Leaders who want power often speak in ways that appeal to authoritarian minds. They don't offer nuance. They promise clarity. They talk about enemies, betrayal, and discipline. They present the world as a battlefield, and they tell followers where to stand. Authoritarian personalities respond to that call. They want to belong to something strong, something certain. They may overlook corruption, violence, or lies if they believe it's in service of the group. If the leader says it's necessary, they believe it. If the leader changes the story, they accept it. Loyalty matters more than consistency. There's also a deep fear at the core. Fear of moral decay, of social breakdown, of weakness. Authoritarian minds often view the world as hostile, not as a place to understand, but as a place to survive. That fear drives the need for control, for punishment, for someone to draw the lines and enforce them. This doesn't mean authoritarian people are monsters. Many are kind in private life. They care for family, support friends, and want to do what's right. But their sense of right and wrong is shaped by hierarchy. They're less likely to challenge unjust authority because they see obedience as a duty, not a risk. In the military, this mindset can be useful. Discipline, order, and loyalty help structure high-stress environments. But in civilian life, it can lead to harm, especially when obedience overrides conscience. The Milgram experiment revealed this clearly. Participants were told to deliver electric shocks to strangers. A man in a lab coat told them to continue. Many did. Even when the stranger screamed, even when they begged. The participants didn't seem cruel. They seemed unsure. They looked to the authority figure for permission to stop and didn't receive it. So they kept going. Not because they wanted to hurt someone, but because someone told them to. That's the core of the authoritarian personality. It trusts power more than feeling. It trusts rules more than people. And once that trust is established, it becomes hard to break. When someone breaks ranks, challenges a rule, or speaks out, the authoritarian doesn't always listen. They ask, "Who are you to question?" They trust the system, not the voice, even when that voice speaks truth. This kind of thinking doesn't vanish. It stays under the surface. It grows in uncertainty. It follows strength. And if not questioned, it can support anything, so long as it comes from above. A man sees a video on his phone. It shows a politician admitting to a crime. His voice is clear. His face looks real. The camera angle changes and everything lines up. The man sends it to friends saying, "Finally the truth." Hours later, a news outlet debunks it. The video was fake, generated by an algorithm. Every frame, every word, every gesture had been built from scratch. But the damage is done. People believe it anyway. That's what deepfakes do. A deepfake is a synthetic piece of media. It looks real, but isn't. It uses machine learning to mimic faces, voices, movements. A person who never spoke those words seems to say them. A person who never appeared in that place seems to be standing there. The better the technology gets, the harder it becomes to tell what's fake. At first, deepfakes were seen as a novelty. Funny videos of celebrities singing songs they never recorded. Movie scenes with faces swapped for laughs. But as the tools spread and improved, so did the stakes. Deepfakes moved from entertainment to manipulation, from jokes to lies. The real danger isn't just that people will believe false things. It's that they will stop believing anything. If a video can be fake, a confession can be fake. If a voice recording can be forged, a denial can be staged. Proof becomes flexible. Facts become soft. Truth becomes just another opinion. This creates what some call the liar's dividend. If someone is caught on tape doing or saying something, they can claim it's fake. Even when it's real, doubt can protect them. As deepfakes get better, bad actors don't have to prove their innocence. They just have to create enough doubt to blur the picture. That uncertainty spreads. People become less sure of what they see and hear. They hesitate to act. They stop trusting sources. They stop trusting each other. When every image could be false, the idea of shared reality starts to fall apart. This isn't a future threat. It's already happening. In 2020, a political candidate in Belgium appeared to deliver a speech about climate change. His voice and face matched, but the video was fake, created by activists. The goal was to provoke discussion, not deceive. But viewers weren't told until the end. Some believed it, others felt tricked. Trust took a hit either way. In another case, a CEO's voice was cloned to trick an employee into sending hundreds of thousands of dollars to scammers. The voice on the line sounded familiar. The request sounded urgent. No one questioned it until it was too late. These aren't isolated problems. They point to a deeper shift, one where people no longer agree on what's real. Without that, trust becomes fragile. Social cohesion thins out. If you can't prove something happened, you can't hold anyone accountable. If you can't believe a witness, you can't protect the truth. This creates space for manipulation. Authoritarian regimes can use deepfakes to discredit dissidents. Criminals can frame others or dodge blame. Propaganda can blur lines so thoroughly that people stop caring. If everything is fake, then nothing matters. That's not just confusion, that's apathy. Democracies rely on shared information. Citizens vote based on what they know or think they know. When that knowledge is poisoned, so is the process. Debate becomes performance. Journalism becomes suspect. A country that can't agree on basic facts can't solve basic problems. Deepfakes don't have to be perfect to do damage. A slightly off video can still spread. People who want to believe it will share it. Others will argue. The debate becomes about authenticity, not the issue itself. Attention shifts. Truth loses ground. This kind of distortion hits hardest in moments of crisis. A fake video of violence can provoke riots. A fake message from a world leader can shift markets or trigger conflict. Even a delay in confirming what's real can cause chaos. The deeper cost is personal. People start to question their memories. They wonder if a voice message from a loved one is real. They see a video of themselves online, edited or distorted, and can't prove it's fake. Victims of harassment or revenge porn may face synthetic images or clips so convincing that even friends and family have doubts. This also changes how people interact. They hold back. They filter what they say and do, not just out of caution, but out of fear of being misrepresented. Every conversation becomes a possible recording. Every image, a possible tool. That pressure builds self-censorship. People don't just worry about being watched, they worry about being recreated. The technology itself isn't evil, but its misuse cuts deep. It blurs the line between reality and fiction, not in art or theory, but in daily life. A person's face becomes a mask anyone can wear. A voice becomes a puppet. And once people realize that, they start to pull back, not just from media, but from each other. Regulation may help. Watermarks, detection tools, and laws can slow the spread. But they can't rebuild trust once it's broken. Even a perfect detection system can't fix a culture where people doubt everything they see. Once the seed of doubt is planted, it grows fast. The more convincing the false becomes, the more people turn inward. They rely on small circles. They reject outside voices. That can feel safe, but it can also isolate. It turns a shared society into a cluster of echo chambers, each one shaped by belief, not by fact. This doesn't mean people should panic, but it does mean they should pay attention. Technology moves faster than law and faster than culture. The tools already exist. The consequences are already unfolding. The danger of deepfakes isn't just that people will be fooled. It's that people will stop looking, that they'll stop asking, that they'll stop trusting not just images, but one another. And in that silence, power grows, lies spread, and truth becomes something you have to fight to remember. A man watches a news segment. The anchor talks about a recent scientific breakthrough. The facts are clear, the data is strong, but the man shakes his head. He doesn't believe it. Not because the information is wrong, but because it doesn't fit his view. He finds a video online that contradicts the report. He shares it, confident that it supports his beliefs. That's the heart of post-truth culture. Post-truth is a world where emotions, beliefs, and personal biases outweigh facts. It's a world where people no longer care whether something is true. They care about whether it fits their worldview. The truth becomes subjective. The more convincing the emotion or the argument, the less the truth matters. This shift isn't sudden. It's gradual. Over time, people start looking for stories that make them feel right, rather than ones that challenge them. They surround themselves with media that confirms their beliefs. They follow people who think like they do. They reject anything that doesn't align. And little by little, society starts to detach from a shared reality. Consider a political debate. A candidate gives a speech, full of statistics, expert opinions, and policy plans. But the crowd reacts to something else: the emotion in the candidate's voice. They cheer when he talks about values, not when he talks about facts. They follow not because of logic, but because they feel something. The same speech, full of the same information, can mean completely different things to different groups, depending on their emotional attachment to the speaker. This emotional priority over facts shows up in how people talk about issues. A person might say, "I don't trust experts," or "that's just the government's version of the truth." They don't question the facts themselves. They question who's giving them. They look at the source, not the content. The story becomes less about the event and more about the narrative around it. This shapes everything, from politics to science to everyday conversations. In social media, this effect is amplified. People share what resonates with them. They share what feels right, what fits their narrative. The platform doesn't reward truth, it rewards engagement. The more emotional the post, the more it spreads. Lies, half-truths, and sensationalized stories get shared because they stir something. They trigger an instinct. And the more they're shared, the more people start to believe them. Not because they're proven, but because they've been repeated enough to feel true. Take a viral video, for example. A person posts something shocking, an image, a clip, a piece of news. It spreads fast. People react. It generates anger, laughter, or excitement. And with each share, the belief in its truth grows. By the time it's fact-checked, it's already taken on a life of its own. The person who originally posted it doesn't care if it's true. They care if it gets a reaction. In a post-truth world, the line between opinion and fact blurs. People say things like, "That's just your opinion," as if facts themselves are subjective. But facts don't change based on belief. A scientific finding doesn't change because it makes you uncomfortable. A historical event doesn't change because it contradicts your worldview. But in post-truth culture, those truths are questioned, dismissed, or ignored altogether when they don't serve the narrative. Consider a health crisis. A virus spreads. Medical professionals, public health officials, and governments put forward clear guidelines. But some reject it. They argue it's an overreaction. They find stories online that support their doubts. They latch onto any piece of information that questions the official narrative, even if it's misleading or false. They might not even care if the information is accurate. They care that it makes them feel justified. And as that narrative spreads, it becomes more difficult to separate the truth from the distortion. People also become less willing to engage with viewpoints that challenge their beliefs. Conversations turn into battles. The goal isn't to understand. The goal is to win, to prove the other side wrong, to reinforce your own position. And so the truth becomes secondary to victory. "I'm right" becomes more important than what's actually true. The deeper the divide, the more invested people become in defending their beliefs, regardless of the facts. Post-truth culture thrives in environments where ambiguity exists. When answers aren't clear, people fill the gaps with whatever fits their needs. A lack of transparency can lead to conspiracy theories, misinformation, and distrust. People begin to question the very structure of truth itself. They stop looking for objective reality and start looking for what fits their worldview. It also leads to a new form of moral certainty. When people base their decisions on beliefs rather than facts, they stop seeing others as people with different opinions. They see them as opponents. The person who believes in climate change is no longer someone with a differing opinion. They're someone who needs to be convinced, shamed, or silenced. The person who rejects climate change science becomes someone to be distrusted. Both sides become entrenched in their own narrative, unwilling to listen. The emotional appeal in post-truth culture isn't always based on anger or fear. Sometimes it's based on hope. People latch onto narratives that promise solutions, even when they lack evidence. Politicians who make bold promises without a clear plan can gain massive support simply by appealing to desire. A leader promises change, hope. They don't need to provide the how, they need to provide the feeling. This shift also leads to moral relativism. If everyone has their own truth, then morality becomes fluid. If you're not bound by facts, then who's to say what's right or wrong? People justify actions based on what feels right to them, even when they harm others. The idea of truth as absolute or fixed gives way to truth as personal preference. In a world where everyone defines their own reality, the idea of shared values becomes more difficult to maintain. A person reads an article online about an event. They don't check the facts. They don't question the source. They simply read the headline, feel outraged, and share it. But the next person reads the same article and sees a different perspective. A third person reads it and dismisses it entirely. No one talks about the actual event. They talk about how they feel about the article. They argue over who's right, but no one ever settles on what really happened. The same thing happens with political events. A president says something in a speech. Half the country hears it and agrees. The other half hears it and dismisses it. The truth becomes secondary to how it makes people feel. It no longer matters if something is factual. What matters is whether it confirms what you already believe. And the more this happens, the harder it is to break through. Trust erodes. Relationships fray. Social cohesion weakens. When people don't share a common reality, they can't build common solutions. They can't agree on what's important or how to fix it. The disagreements grow deeper, the divides widen, and as the walls between truth and belief grow taller, society itself risks splintering into fragments, each with its own version of reality. A man walks into a room, and the first thing he sees is a poster on the wall. It's large and bold. Danger is all around you. Below it, a picture of an enemy, a shadowy figure with dark eyes. The words promise that if you don't act, if you don't follow orders, everything will fall apart. The message isn't about what's right or wrong, it's about fear. And that fear, in the end, will make him comply. Fear is a powerful tool. When it's used wisely, it can save lives. But when it's manipulated, it becomes a weapon. Propaganda of fear is not about facts. It's about creating a constant, underlying sense of danger that makes people desperate for protection. In that desperation, they give up their autonomy. They stop thinking for themselves. They follow the instructions. They act out of fear, not reason. You can see this in politics. A leader speaks in dark, uncertain tones. They talk about enemies, foreign threats, internal dangers. The world is chaotic, the future unclear, and only they can protect the people. They show images of attacks, of destruction. The message is clear. If you don't support them, if you don't trust them, the worst will happen. People, unsure of their safety, rally to the leader, not because they believe in their ideas, but because they fear what could happen without them. This isn't just in the hands of tyrants. It happens in everyday life. A news segment shows a spike in crime. A politician promises security. A company warns of a new threat and offers protection plans. The focus isn't on what's true or false. It's on creating a feeling, fear, and using it to shape behavior. People feel safer when they act. They may buy a product, they may vote a certain way, but they're not acting on reason. They're acting on the need to feel secure. This fear-based control works because it taps into basic human instincts. Fear is primal. It triggers fight or flight. It shuts down complex thinking. When a person is afraid, they don't take time to analyze every choice. They want the fastest, most direct solution. That's where those in power step in. They offer answers that often demand compliance, obedience, or submission. In this state of fear, critical thinking weakens. People stop questioning. They stop considering the consequences of their actions. The fear becomes a fog, clouding their judgment. They trust the people who promise protection because they believe that anything else might lead to disaster. The more fear is stoked, the more control is gained. This dynamic doesn't always come from loud, aggressive campaigns. Sometimes it's subtle. A government runs ads about the dangers of the other, a group of people, a foreign power, a way of life. They show images of chaos, of loss, of disaster. Over time, these messages sink into the background of daily life. Fear becomes the backdrop. Even when the facts don't match the narrative, the fear remains. People act based on what they feel, not what they know. Even in communities, propaganda of fear plays out. A leader tells a story about how crime is on the rise. They don't show statistics. They don't offer a solution. They simply speak about the growing danger. People react. They lock their doors. They vote for policies that promise safety, often without knowing the full picture. Fear, not reason, shapes their choices. This tactic thrives in times of uncertainty, in economic crises, in moments of social unrest, in the wake of tragedy. People are more vulnerable when they're unsure, and in those moments, fear becomes a tool that cuts through doubt. It gives them something to hold on to, something to follow. It's easier to trust someone who claims to have a solution to the chaos. It's easier to believe that the enemy must be defeated before things get worse. The problem with this is that fear can become a permanent state. It doesn't need to be tied to specific events. It doesn't need to be based on real threats. The more people are conditioned to feel unsafe, the more control can be exerted. When fear is in charge, logic doesn't stand a chance. People may find themselves agreeing to things they wouldn't have considered under normal circumstances. They may accept surveillance, restrictions on freedom, even violence, just to feel protected. One of the darkest aspects of propaganda of fear is that it creates an us versus them mentality. The other becomes the target of fear, the group or idea that threatens the safety of the people. This division justifies all sorts of actions. People who are afraid stop seeing others as individuals. They see them as threats. They stop asking, what's really going on, and start asking, what can we do to stop this? This process doesn't just affect politics, it spreads to everyday interactions. A person is warned about an illness. Suddenly, they distrust anyone who looks sick. They start avoiding people who might be a threat, even if they aren't. They assume the worst. They stop thinking about the facts and start reacting to the feeling of fear. Fear is not only irrational, it's contagious. A group starts to feel it, and the emotion spreads. In a room full of anxious people, logic becomes harder to hear. The collective fear becomes the new reality. And once that fear is in place, it's hard to dislodge. People may cling to their fears, not because they still believe them, but because they no longer trust their ability to distinguish between what's real and what's imagined. Once fear takes over, the need for security becomes the highest priority. People give up their freedoms, their privacy, their autonomy. They ask for protection, not understanding that protection can come with a cost. But in a moment of fear, the cost doesn't seem so high. People are willing to sacrifice a little to avoid the threat. They're willing to give up their rights for safety. But once that sacrifice is made, it's hard to take it back. Control becomes harder to challenge. Freedom becomes harder to reclaim. Even when the threats are not real, fear still works. If people can be convinced that they're under constant threat, they will look to those in power for answers, often without questioning the truth. They will accept whatever solutions are presented just to feel safer. And in doing so, they lose the ability to think clearly, to act independently. Fear doesn't just suppress action, it suppresses reason itself. When fear is the lens through which people see the world becomes a much darker place. Actions are no longer taken based on what's right or just, but on what seems necessary to survive. Fear becomes a prison, and the key is control. Those who control the narrative, who amplify the fear, control the choices of everyone who lives under that cloud. And in the end, the more they fear, the more people are willing to give up their freedoms just to feel safe. A woman listens as a politician speaks about a crisis. The politician's words are filled with emotion, concern for the people, compassion for the vulnerable. The speech is powerful, moving. She feels sympathy, even though the plan presented doesn't make sense to her. As the speech ends, someone asks for her opinion. She hesitates, unsure how to respond. She feels the weight of the emotions the politician stirred. She doesn't want to appear cold, so she nods and agrees, even though the details don't add up. That's weaponized empathy at work. Weaponized empathy uses emotions to manipulate. It takes genuine feelings, compassion, care, concern, and twists them to silence opposition or prevent critical thinking. It doesn't ask people to think carefully about an issue. It asks them to feel. And once the emotional response is triggered, it's often enough to shut down any reasoned debate. In the political arena, weaponized empathy often shows up when a leader or spokesperson emphasizes the suffering of a particular group, event, or situation. They focus on the pain or hardship people are facing, often with graphic descriptions or heart-wrenching images. The goal isn't necessarily to solve the problem, but to make the audience feel so deeply that questioning the proposed solution feels callous or cruel. The more emotional the appeal, the harder it is to disagree without seeming heartless. Take a situation where a government proposes a new policy in response to a national crisis. They present the policy not through facts or data, but through stories of people in pain, families who have lost homes, children who have been affected. The message is clear. These people are suffering, and we must act. The focus isn't on whether the policy will work, whether it's fair, or whether it's the best solution. The focus is on making the audience feel sympathy, so that questioning the policy seems like an attack on the victims, rather than a genuine concern for the effectiveness of the plan. A similar tactic appears in marketing. Companies often tap into empathy to sell products or services. They show sad images of animals in shelters or children in need, then offer an easy solution. Buy this, donate now, and you can make a difference. The emotional appeal creates a sense of obligation. People don't think about whether the company is using their money effectively or whether there are better ways to help. They act on the feelings stirred by the images. This emotional manipulation also appears in personal interactions. A person argues for a course of action by focusing on the emotional fallout of any other option. They say, "Think about how this will affect the children. Think about the elderly." The appeal isn't about the facts or logic of the situation. It's about making the other person feel so responsible for others' pain that they can't disagree. Any attempt to point out flaws in the argument is met with the accusation, "How can you not care about these people?" It shifts the conversation from a discussion of policies to a personal judgment about someone's character. Weaponized empathy works by framing the issue in such a way that any response other than agreement becomes morally questionable. If someone speaks out against a policy designed to help a group in need, they're immediately labeled as heartless, indifferent, or cruel. The emotion becomes a shield that prevents rational discussion, because to question the policy would mean being indifferent to the people in need. This tactic also works by shifting the debate from issues of fairness, effectiveness, or justice to emotional appeals. For example, a politician might push a policy by saying, "This is about humanity. This is about compassion." They don't present any solid arguments or evidence for the policy's effectiveness. They focus only on how it feels to care, to help. In doing so, they bypass the difficult work of justifying their actions or plans. They ask people to feel, not to think. And when that happens, it becomes harder for individuals to argue against the policy without being seen as cruel or inhumane. Weaponized empathy can also lead to short-term solutions that don't address long-term problems. When the primary motivation is to make people feel good in the moment, whether it's through donations, government programs, or other means, it becomes easy to overlook sustainable solutions. The emotional appeal works because it gives people the sense that they are doing something worthwhile, but often the efforts don't lead to lasting change. Instead of creating thoughtful, long-term solutions, the focus shifts to immediate emotional responses. The rush to do something can often lead to decisions that are not carefully considered, not fully thought out, and not ultimately effective. In relationships, weaponized empathy can manipulate people by putting them in positions where they feel guilty for disagreeing. One partner may make an emotional appeal, saying, "How could you be so selfish? Don't you care about me?" In that situation, it becomes harder to challenge or criticize the other person because the emotional burden of caring for their feelings overwhelms the need for rational dialogue. The person who disagrees is forced to consider not just the issue at hand, but the emotional weight of the situation. The emotional appeal silences their voice, turning a potentially healthy discussion into one where the emotional outcome, rather than the facts or the logic, dominates the conversation. This dynamic becomes even more toxic when it extends beyond personal relationships into larger social issues. A corporation, for example, may present a charitable effort in a way that asks people to buy into the emotional narrative, help those in need, give now. However, the focus remains on generating positive feelings and donations, not on the effectiveness of the aid. The emotional manipulation masks the fact that the company's real goal is not social change, but increasing profits. Instead of focusing on creating meaningful and impactful solutions, the focus remains on stirring up feelings of guilt or pity, leading people to act without fully considering the consequences. In these instances, weaponized empathy doesn't foster compassion. It leverages it. It uses people's genuine desire to help or care to push them into agreeing with something without critically examining it. The more that fear, guilt, and pity are used to manipulate emotions, the more people stop thinking for themselves. They stop asking whether the solution is effective, whether it's fair, or whether it truly helps. Instead, they follow the emotional narrative set before them, unable to separate the legitimate need for action from the emotional appeal used to drive them into action. Ultimately, weaponized empathy diminishes the ability to think critically and engage in meaningful conversations. It reduces complex issues to emotional responses, making it harder to find true solutions. Instead of addressing the root causes of problems, it pushes people to act based on what feels right, which can lead to decisions that don't resolve anything at all. It's an emotional trap that ultimately leaves society and individuals in a state of reaction, not reason.